Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. Chapter 1, An Eventful First Day. Jengar battle time, shouts the trainer tossing a Pokeball onto the arena. From the Pokeball emerges a dark purple ghost-type Pokemon with a roundish body, big red eyes, a big toothy grin and a spiky back with short legs. Jengar, shouts the purple Pokemon with a sinister laugh, staring intently at the opposing trainer on the other side. Thomas Bren has started this semi-final battle with his Jengar. What Pokemon will Priscilla Hark use to oppose this strong-looking Pokemon? Shouted the announcer over the cheering crowd which filled the stupendously large stadium situated at the Indigo Plateau. The crowd waits with held breath to see what Pokemon it would be. Priscilla, a young woman about 17 with black hair, just smirks holding up a Pokeball and shouts, "Begin this with Flamethrower Magmar," and tosses the Pokeball into the field to reveal a tailed, bipedal Pokemon with a red body that had a yellow flame design on its belly and a flaming yellow crest on its head with a beak. "Magmar," shouts Magmar, immediately launching into a flamethrower attack at the grinning Jengar. Thomas smirks and quickly shouts, "Evade Jengar and use Shadow Ball." Jengar jumps up just in time to let the attack pass by and then puts his hand together to form a black ball of energy which he then throws at Magmar, who at the command of his trainer counters with Fire Spin. It looked to be shaping into a fine battle. But this story isn't about Thomas or Priscilla, so let us change our point of view and let our attention be drawn to the hero of our story, Ash Ketchum. Our protagonist is currently lying in bed watching the TV intently as the semi-final Pokemon battle between Thomas Bren and Priscilla Hark was being broadcast live from the Indigo Plateau. That Jengar is strong and fast, but that Magmar's fire attacks are intense. This could go either way, Ash muttered absently before his eyes strayed from the TV to a lounge chair in the corner with a set of clothes and a backpack. Ash felt that familiar wave of excitement wash over his body once again. He was finally going to become a Pokemon trainer. For those who are not in the know, in the Pokemon world, when a child becomes 10 they become eligible for a Pokemon trainer's license, which in layman's terms means that they can go on a Pokemon journey. What that child does on their journey is entirely up to them. Some go on to become renowned trainers who battle their way through various gyms to earn badges, and then when they collect 8 badges in a league they go on to compete in that league's tournament with hopes to become known as champions. Some prefer the way of the coordinator, specialized trainers who compete in special battles, known contests, where the main emphasis is on the beauty and appearance of both the battles and the Pokemon. Then there are breeders, researchers and many other. But Ash's dream is to be a Pokemon master. What exactly this means not even Ash knows. The closest he could think of would be the master champion of all the regions, so this is what he was gunning for. One more night, and it begins, the beginning of my real life. Ash took a look at his bedside clock which read 10, Ash sighed knowing that he wouldn't really be able to sleep yet, but he also knew that the sooner he did the sooner tomorrow would come. It would seem though that constant excitement over a long period of time though is quite exhausting, because he seemed to instantly fall asleep. It was the sound of the neighbor's Dodrio that woke Ash up early the next morning, and even though he usually would drop right back to sleep for a few extra hours, it was the thought of what day it was that got him to bounce right out of bed and into the shower at barely 7 a.m. 15 minutes later and Ash was jumping down the stairs dressed in his new traveling gear, barely suppressing a loud cheer. He pulled his exclusive Pokemon League hat down over his face to hide his face-splitting grin. He couldn't wait to meet his first Pokemon. Ash then smelt a delicious smell coming from the kitchen and went inside to see his mother Delia cooking bacon and eggs. Ash's stomach growled long and loud enough that Delia looked up from the over to Ash with a smile. "Good morning, Ash. How is my favorite trainer this lovely morning?" Delia asked with a grin after looking at Ash drooling all over his new clothes. Ash saw her grin and looked down at his spit-covered shirt with a blush and wiped it up before replying. "I'm great, Mom," Ash replied before collecting a plate and letting Delia ladle some of God's breakfast onto his plate. Ash savored the food before finishing and putting the plate into the sink. Ash looked up at the clock and noticed it was now 8 a.m. Ash grinned happily and ran to the door. Delia looked at him and asked, "Where are you going so early?" Professor Oak isn't expecting you until 9-inch while sitting down with a cup of tea and the morning crossword. What is an 8-letter word beginning with V that means frustration? Vexation. Ash answered distractedly, I want to get there early so that Gary doesn't get there first, so I'll see you later, before running full pelt out the door and down the road towards Oak's laboratory. Ash ran the few miles to Oak's lab in what seemed to him a record time. Running up the stairs and into the main reception area took only a few seconds. Ash took a quick look around and noted nobody was around, so he decided to try and find the professor. Normally around this time Oak would be in his office checking emails, organizing his notes and checking his schedule. Ash quickly traversed the lab and peeked into the office. Not here. Ash mumbled, wondering where he could be. Looking for someone, said a clearly amused voice from behind him. Ash jumped in shock before turning around to see the very man he was looking for, Professor Samuel Oak. A tallish man with kind features, faded brown hair, wearing brown pants, red shirt and a white lab coat. Professor Oak is one of the foremost experts on Pokémon in the world, and he is quite regularly being consulted by other experts, attending conferences, giving lectures on all sorts of Pokémon-related subjects and all sorts of other things. Ash rubbed the back his head bashfully. I was just looking for you actually, Professor, Ash said with embarrassed grin. I just couldn't wait until 9 to get here. Oak smirked knowingly. I can see where this is going. You are too much like your father to not be impatient, what with it being such a special day. Oak finished with a fond smile of remembrance with the thought of Ash's late father. Ash bowed his head, thinking of how proud his father would have been to see this day, the day his son set out on his journey. Oak finished reminiscing and gestured inside the lab. I suppose wouldn't hurt for you wait with me in the lab. Ash grinned and walked in, looking at all the fancy gizmos and the various diagrams, and there in the middle of the room on a stand lay 3 Pokeball. Ash felt himself drawn to the stand but got held back by Oak. Not yet, Ash, you have to wait for the others. Ash groaned but nodded his assent. A while later Ash was pacing impatiently, muttering curses to himself. How much longer they going to be? This waiting is killing me. It seems however that Ash should have been paying more attention to his surroundings, because the next thing he knew there was a shout right in his ear. Right here, Ashy boy, screamed a boy from behind him. For the second time that day Ash jumped in shock and whirled around angrily, yelling, what did you do that for, Gary? Gary Oak, Professor Oak's grandson, Ash's childhood rival and self-dubbed Pokémon champion, which in Ash's language meant royal jackass. Oh, he was good all right, but he was just so arrogant and up himself that Ash couldn't stand the sight of him. Ash eagerly looked forward to the day when he defeated him in a full 6-on-6 Pokémon battle, that would teach him. I just couldn't help myself, Ashy boy, you were just standing there looking so oblivious and out of it that it would have been a crime not to do it. Gary snickered with a I'm better than you look on his face. Ash could feel blood rushing to his cheeks, and he clenched his fists to stop himself from shouting back the first thing that come to his mind, and no doubt making him look stupid. Gary smirked. What? Have nothing to say, loser, he said with deliberate mocking voice. He loved winding Ash up. Ash was about to retaliate when Oak came up, walking out of his office where he had been taking a call. That was just Mrs. McNally and Mr. Hobb. It seems that the other 2 trainers won't be making it today, something about eating too much, so it looks like it's just you 2 today, Oak said while walking over to the stand with the Pokeball. Ash rushed over the stand to have a closer look. He saw the 3 ball he had seen before and could deduce what was likely to be in them, when he noticed there was a 4th ball. Ash leaned over curiously and looked at the ball under the glass cover. There was what looked like a lightning bolt on it, an electric type. Ash wondered. Strangely enough, he felt drawn to it. Ash recognized this feeling. He had been having them for years. His dad had said that it was his heritage showing itself, and ever since then whenever he had these feelings he went with it. They hadn't been wrong yet. Ash was drawn from his musings by Professor Oak, who had picked up the 3 ball and had already expanded one. You have 3 Pokémon to choose from, Professor Oak began saying while releasing the Pokémon. First there is Bulbasaur, a grass type. He is a male. Out came a spotted blue-green dinosaur-like Pokémon with a bulb on its back. It had red eyes and looked very sturdy. Bulba, shouted the young Pokémon happily, looking forward to meeting his new trainer. Next is Charmander, a fire type. and she's female. Out came another dinosaur-like Pokémon with red skin standing on its two back legs and a long tail, the end of which was on fire. It was a rather timid-looking Pokémon. Charmander, mumbled Charmander shyly, she looked very nervous. And of course, last but not least, Squirtle, a water type, and he is a male. Out came what looked like a turtle standing on two stubby legs, with blue skin, a red shell, stubby arms, a round head with big eyes, and a curly blue tail. Squirtle, shouted the confident-looking Squirtle with a victory sign. Ash noted that Oak hadn't brought out the fourth Pokémon and was about to ask why when Gary spoke up. I already know who I'm going to pick. Gary walked up and pointed at Squirtle. Squirtle cheered and jumped around happily while the two looked downcast. Ash frowned while Oak just nodded, returned Squirtle to his ball before giving the Pokeball to Gary along with 5 empty Pokeball and a Pokédex. Gary smiled looking at his new Pokémon before smirking at Ash, "See you around, Ashy boy," and walked off laughing. Ash growled angrily but didn't retaliate, wanting to be the better man. Ash forced himself to calm down, and as soon as he heard a car driving off he exclaimed loudly, "Finally he's gone, now I can choose in peace," before turning around and walking over to Bulbasaur and Charmander and squatted in front of them. Charmander and Bulbasaur looked up at him hopefully and Ash smiled reassuringly. Ash looked into the eyes of them both but didn't feel any sort of connection to them, not like he did that fourth Pokeball. Ash frowned thoughtfully. "You two would both be fantastic Pokemon for me to start with, but there is one last thing I need to do before I choose." Bulbasaur and Charmander looked at each other in confusion. Ash looked over at Professor Oak, who was watching Ash curiously. "Hey Professor, what's in that other Pokeball over there?" Ash pointed at the ball with the lightning bolt. Oak looked at the Pokeball in question with a raised eyebrow. "What, that one?" Oak went over the stand and pressed a few buttons, the glass cover slid away and Oak picked up the Pokeball. "I've only just caught this one, so it is still mostly wild, not appropriate at all for a beginner." Oak went to put it away but Ash interrupted. "That's okay, I'm sure I will be able to handle it," Ash said with his typical unwavering confidence. Oak didn't look so sure. Well, Oak looked like he wavering, so Ash went for the kill. "You said that this Pokemon was wild. I'll have to start taming wild Pokemon very soon anyway, so why not start now?" Ash continued. He saw Oak was teetering on the edge and he spoke up again. "I want to be known as Pokemon Master, as an exceptional trainer. So I will need an exceptional starter Pokemon. Besides, I'm sure that my dad would agree." That did it. Oak looked at the ball with a resigned sigh. "Well, I must admit this particular Pokemon would definitely make for an exceptional starter Pokemon if trained right." "Oh, very well, have it your way," and with that Oak tossed the ball onto the floor, from which a Pokemon appeared in a bolt of lightning. Ash, Professor Oak, Bulbasaur and Charmander watched in fascination as the Pokemon took shape to reveal what looked like a yellow mouse. It stood about 40 centimeters tall with a lightning bolt-shaped tail that was nearly as long as it was. It had long ears with black tips, it had red spots on its cheeks and 2 brown strips on its back. Ash watched as the Pokemon blinked and said, "Pikachu." Ash and the others blinked as they became aware of themselves again. It seemed as though Pikachu had become aware as well, because he growled. He seemed quite upset to have captured. Oak and the other 2 Pokemon backed away looking a bit nervous, because being an electric type, Pikachu's electric attacks would hurt quite a bit. Ash, however, although a little nervous himself, he did not allow himself to show it. Ash slowly approached Pikachu showing empty hands, and when close enough he slowly knelt down on one knee, being careful not to show any sudden movements. Pikachu watched Ash very closely. The moment he did anything he was going to zap him. In back of his mind Ash could hear his dad. "Ash, the first thing you need to do when taming a new Pokemon is to first gain their respect. Normally this happens when you defeat and then capture them, because in their minds if you could capture them it means you are a strong trainer and therefore worthy of their respect. From there you work on building a bond of mutual trust, and eventually if you work at it you will have gained their loyalty and friendship. If however you have to gain the respect and trust of a still mostly wild Pokemon who you didn't capture yourself, the first thing you must always remember is do not show fear. Because you see, Ash, all Pokemon in their hearts are natural-born warriors. They love to battle. Some may not show it as much as others, but that instinct is always there. Fear Ash, to such a warrior is a sign of weakness, and if a Pokémon perceives weakness, they will never respect you, and then the bond between you and the Pokémon will never be. Remember this, Ash, and you could tame anything. Ash gazed upon Pikachu for about a minute looking for something he didn't entirely understand. Pikachu in turn gazed on this strange human who had approached him so fearlessly. Pikachu didn't know what to think. There was something about this boy that drew Pikachu to him. Ash eventually gave Pikachu a grin and held out his hand. Pikachu crouched lower to the ground, his cheeks sparking, getting ready for whatever this boy was going to do. When Ash's hand was within reaching distance to Pikachu, Ash gave a smile and said, "Hi, my name is Ash, nice to meet you, Pikachu." Pikachu gazed at Ash in shock. He couldn't help but get out of his crouch, walk up to Ash and shake his outstretched hand while saying hello. What else would he supposed to do with such a polite greeting? Shock him? Ash's grin got even bigger when Pikachu shook his hand and he changed from kneeling to sitting cross-legged in front of Pikachu, who continued to watch him, this time in curiosity. "My full name is Ash Ketchum and I am here to choose my first Pokémon, and I was wondering if you would consent to be my first Pokémon, Pikachu," Ash asked Pikachu quite earnestly. Pikachu pet his head to the side with a twitch of his ears and then pointed to himself, "Pika Pie." Ash nodded, "That's right, you. See, I have a dream to be a Pokémon master, and to do that I need exceptional Pokémon, and I want to do that right from the start. It's true I could pick Bulbasaur or Charmander over there." That this, Ash smiled and waved at the two Pokémon who waved back. Ash then turned back to Pikachu, who had also glanced at the other Pokémon, "But they along with Squirtle are so commonly used as starters that I don't really want to start with them. Why should I get one of the standard starters when I have a chance for the uncommon?" Pikachu still didn't look so sure, so Ash kept going, "You won't regret it, Pikachu, I promise." Ash once again held out his hand, "So I will ask again, can I choose you, Pikachu?" Pikachu took a good long look at Ash and eventually nodded and shook Ash's hand. Ash's smile got bigger and he jumped up with a cheer before turning to Professor Oak. "Professor, I choose Pikachu." Professor Oak let out a sigh of relief. "That went better than I thought it would." "Very well, Ash, seeing as you seem to have things in hand, I will register Pikachu as your Pokémon." Ash let out another cheer before squatting down in front of Pikachu. "You hear that, Pikachu?" Ash exclaimed happily before a soft smile touched his face. "Welcome to the family, Pikachu." Pikachu blushed, which was quite a feat, considering that he was covered in yellow fur. Ash slowly reached out his hand, and when Pikachu didn't pull away, he started petting Pikachu and giving scratches behind the ears, to which Pikachu responded positively with various pleased noises. Ash eventually picked Pikachu up and put him on his shoulder, noting with happiness that Pikachu didn't flinch or move away but instead gave him a small lick on the cheek. Ash turned to Professor Oak, who had been watching the bonding trainer and Pokémon in amused delight. "Another good match," Oak declared with an air of satisfaction before putting on a serious face and walking over to Ash. "Here is your Pokédex and some Pokeball, and of course Pikachu's Pokeball." "Thanks, Professor," said Ash, pocketing the ball and Pokédex in his jacket, but when he looked at Pikachu still sitting on his shoulder, he noticed Pikachu glaring at his Pokeball with great dislike. Ash looked at the ball in question with slight confusion before showing Pikachu the ball. "Don't you like Pokeball, Pikachu?" he asked, to which Pikachu answered, "Pika," with a vigorous shake of his head, and to Ash that could only mean a resounding no. Ash considered Pikachu with appraising eyes, who looked back at him with heated eyes but seemed a little nervous. Ash grinned. "Then we will just have to do without a Pokeball, won't we?" Pikachu let a cheer and rubbed up against Ash's face in pleased thanks, and Ash just let out a chuckle. That earned him some kudos with Pikachu. Ash then remembered a little something and walked over to Bulbasaur and Charmander, who were both looking a little upset. Ash smiled and knelt down and gave both a rub on the head. "Don't worry, you two, you may not have been chosen today, but there are still 2 more trainers coming here later to get their first Pokémon, and I know for a fact that they were really looking forward to meeting you, so cheer up." Bulbasaur and Charmander perked up a little from the encouragement and thanked Ash before allowing Professor Oak to return them to their ball to wait for their trainers. "Was that everything, Professor?" asked Ash to Professor Oak, who nodded yes. "Yes, that was everything, Ash. It is now time for you and Pikachu to begin your journey, and just know that if you ever need to know something, all you have to do is call me up and ask," Oak replied with a grin. "Now you two be sure to look after each other, all right?" Okay Professor, see you later, said Ash before heading back to his house along with Pikachu chatting amenably together. Ash and Pikachu are finally on their way to Viridian City after having picking up Ash's stuff and introduced Delia to Pikachu. Delia had taken an instant shine to Pikachu and had showered many praises on Ash and Pikachu both. Pikachu had taken an instant liking to the kind woman. Ash and Pikachu eventually said goodbye to Delia after lunch along with many promises to stay in contact they had set off. Currently Ash and Pikachu were walking along Route 1 on the way to Viridian City, their first destination. Ash was enthusiastically telling Pikachu all his plans to begin Pikachu's training along with of course catching more Pokémon and then their training in turn. The first thing we have to do is work out a set of regular exercises for you and your eventual teammates to do every day. We need to work on your strength, both your body and your attacks, your speed, your defense, your evasive skills, your accuracy, your endurance and your stamina. Ash ticked things off with his hand as he listed various things to work on. Pikachu's eyes continued to widen with each item Ash said. It sounded like a lot of work. I will probably work something else out for myself as well so that I can train right along with you, continued Ash before noticing how nervous Pikachu was becoming. Oh don't worry, we won't be doing it all at once, and some of it can even be done at the same time, Ash reassured Pikachu who let out a sigh of relief. Ash chuckled at Pikachu's sigh before continuing. Then there will be mock battles between you and whoever we capture for our family so that everyone can get practice at battling various different opponents. Pikachu looked at Ash wondering what that meant and asked, Pi Pikachu Chu Pikachu. Ash looked at Pikachu, wishing not for the last time he could understand what he was saying before seeing the questioning look on Pikachu's face. Oh, you are wondering what I meant by that, are you? Pika, nodded Pikachu. Ash pondered how to answer that when he got an idea. Well, let's put it this way, the way you would fight a flying type such as Pidgeotto for instance would be completely different than the way you battle another Pokémon, let's say a ground type like Sandslash. Pidgeotto flies through the air and therefore you would not be able to easily use physical attacks like Quick Attack or Tackle, so you would have to use your electric attacks like Thundershock or Thunderbolt to attack from a distance. But then Sandslash is a ground type, so your electric attacks are useless, so you would have to use physical attacks. But there would also be an added danger in that Sandslash can dig underground, so we would have to work out a way to remove those advantages, get it? Pikachu nodded in affirmative. It did make sense. Pokémon are all different, so stands to reason that they would fight differently as well. Battles were tougher than he thought. Ash grinned and was about to continue when he heard what sounded like a cry of pain. Ash stopped in confusion looking around for the source of the noise. Pikachu, did you hear that? Ash looked at Pikachu who nodded his head in a yes, he had heard that. Ash then heard another cry and then realized he wasn't hearing with his ears, he was hearing these noises in his mind. Ash could feel them coming from the forest and he started running in the direction of the pain being, it was calling for help. Pikachu ran along with him wondering what was going on and called out, Pika Pi, and then jumped up on Ash's shoulder. Ash looked at Pikachu on his shoulder. I'm hearing something in my mind, Pikachu. Crying out in pain. And it is coming from over this way. Ash continued to run towards the voice which continually got louder the closer they came. Pikachu finally the sound of something ahead, whimpers and cries of pain. Pikachu jumped and started running ahead to check what it was when he and Ash burst into a clearing and beheld ahead of them a small pink Pokémon, but neither Ash nor Pikachu knew what it was. It was surrounded by a couple of other concerned and terrified-looking Pokémon who milled around uselessly, not being able to do anything to help the obviously sick Pokémon. Ash and Pikachu skidded to a stop beside the pink Pokémon and, ignoring the presence of the other Pokémon, who had sprung out of the way, quickly examined the crying Pokémon. It was a cat-like creature about the same size as Pikachu with rather fine pink hair covering its whole body. It had a long, skinny tail ending with a rounded tip. It had big hind legs like a rabbit's and short arms with three-fingered paws. Its roundish head had triangular ears. Ash picked up the rather small Pokémon and cradled the Pokémon gently in his arms, all the while making shushing noises to try and calm it at least a little. The creature opened its eyes and Ash saw big baby blue eyes full of childlike innocence but very scared looking and tainted with pain. The Pokémon took a quick look at Ash's worried gaze before closing them again in pain and turned to grab Ash's shirt in an obvious need for comfort. Ash made shushing noises while getting out his Pokédex to quickly scan the Pokémon so that he would at least know its name. The Pokédex beeped, Mew, a Psychic-type legendary Pokémon. This Pokémon is capable of learning every move in existence, so experts speculate whether it is the ancestor of all Pokémon. Ash stared in shock. A legendary was lying right here in his arms and on his first day. Pikachu and the other Pokémon stared in wonder at the Pokémon in Ash's arms. Talk about wow. They were all brought back to reality when Mew whimpered loudly and tried to burrow closer to Ash. Ash looked around viewing the area around him and couldn't see anything that could cause Mew's pain, so he bent down and asked the Pokémon around him, did any of you see what Mew was doing just before that could have caused this? A Sentret jumped shouting, Sentret Sen, and beckoned Ash to follow before scampering off into the forest. Ash jumped up and ran after the Sentret, making sure not to jostle Mew too much, and Pikachu quickly followed before jumping on Ash's shoulder. The Sentret led them to a tree on which some sort of large yellowish-green berries were growing. Ash gasped in recognition. He knew those berries. Ash looked around and spotted the eaten cores of at least 2 of the berries. Ash swore loudly, those are Rikyuta berries. They are extremely poisonous. Ash looked at the Sentret in panic, are you telling me that Mew ate some of those? The Sentret nodded seriously and Ash swore even louder. We have to get Mew help quickly. Ash looked down at Mew, who was gasping and wheezing. But Mew won't last much longer like this. Ash pondered for a moment before remembering a little trick his mother taught him for such situations. Ash quickly knelt down and gently arranged Mew so that it was comfortably lying over his lap, face pointed at the ground. Pikachu and the other Pokémon gathered around wondering what Ash was about to do. Ash grimaced slightly before saying to Mew, sorry about this, and forcefully pushed his fingers into Mew's mouth to rub the back of its throat in a certain spot. Mew's eyes opened wide before its stomach reflexively convulsed and Mew unwillingly puked a rather considerable amount of yellow puke onto the ground, where it began to bubble and hiss rather ominously. The Pokémon all looked on in horrified disgust. That yellow stuff had been in Mew. Ash continued to slide and rub Mew's back, both to comfort the teary-eyed Pokémon and to encourage more puke, which happened twice more before stopping. When the puke stopped, Mew slumped in Ash's lap, both from relief that most of the pain was gone and from exhaustion. Ash quickly cleaned himself and Mew up and then wrapped Mew in his jacket to keep it warm. While that may have helped a great deal with the pain, Mew's life is still in danger. Ash stood up and adjusted Mew in his arms so that it was secure. Ash smiled when he noticed that Mew was a great deal more relaxed and calmer than before and had even fallen asleep. Ash didn't know at the time, though, that it actually bespoke of a great deal of trust on Mew's part. Ash looked around to get his bearings and found that he actually recognized this section of the forest, knowing that it was fairly close to Professor Oak's laboratory. Ash then looked down at Pikachu. Come on Pikachu, we have to hurry back to Professor Oak's place. I need you escort us so that nothing else happens. Last thing we need now is something like a flock of angry Spearow attacking us, Ash ordered. Pikachu nodded an affirmative with a confident, Pikachu. Ash looked at the puddle of rancid-looking puke with a grimace. As for that, Ash trailed of looking at the other Pokémon around them. Bury it, wash it away, I don't care, just do not touch it. The Pokémon all shouted their agreement, causing Ash to grin before he ran off shouting back a, thank you for your help guys, with Pikachu trailing close behind. It took the better part of an hour to get back to Oak's laboratory, even while constantly running. Ash and Pikachu had to take care that Mew was comfortable while moving fast, and Pikachu even had to take care of a few aggressive Pokémon who got in the way, but they were quickly and easily handled. It made Ash all the more grateful that he had picked such a strong Pokémon. He even said this to Pikachu, who had blushed from the obvious compliments. All the while Ash kept a close eye on Mew, who was extremely weak after being so violently and painfully ravaged by the poisonous Rikyuta berries. If they didn't get Mew a special antidote, and soon, Mew was still in danger of dying. When Oak's laboratory finally appeared in view, Ash and Pikachu both heaved a sigh of relief. Ash looked down at the sleeping Mew. Don't you worry Mew, you are going to be just fine. A couple minutes later Ash arrived at Oak's lab and rang the door bell. He could hear Oak coming to front door calling out, coming. Oak had been expecting many things when he opened the door, but he did not expect to see a sweaty and puffing Ash along with an equally puffing Pikachu sitting on his shoulder carrying something wrapped in his jacket. Ash! What are you doing here? I thought you would have been halfway to Viridian by now. Oak exclaimed, most astonished to see the boy before looking at the wrapped something. And what is that you're carrying? Ash grinned bashfully before saying, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Oak crossed his arms. Try me, he said rather dryly. What could this 10-year-old boy present him that could surprise him? Ash grinned mischievously before slowly unwrapping Mew, taking care not to wake it. Ash watched as Oak's eyes seemed to widen to mythical proportions as Mew was revealed. Ash gave a small grin before getting serious. Professor, do you have any antidotes available? Oak was jarred back to reality by the question, what do you need antidote for? Oak was still in shock. Who wouldn't be if a legendary Pokémon just showed up in your doorstep? Ash hoisted Mew closer to himself. I found this Mew in the forest just out of Pallet town. It seems to have eaten some Rikuta berries. That got Oak's attention. You had better come inside, Ash. Bring Mew to the infirmary and we will administer the antidote. Ash followed Oak to the infirmary and watched quietly as Oak filled a needle with the antidote and injected it straight into Mew's bloodstream. Ash finally allowed himself to relax when Mew was finally out of danger. As Mew rested on an infirmary bed, Ash quietly told the professor of how he and Pikachu had been walking to Viridian while discussing training when he had heard Mew's mental cry for help. How he found Mew lying on the ground convulsing with intense pain. How the scent-rat had led him to the Rikuta tree which led to the discovery of the eaten berries. How he used his mother's trick of rubbing the back of Mew's throat to induce puking, and then how he had run the whole way back with Pikachu protecting them from the more aggressive Pokémon. Oak had listened quietly and had asked various questions to clarify a few things. He even complimented on Ash's quick thinking in both the puking and wrapping Mew up to keep it warm. But one thing still didn't make sense to him. How is it though that Mew came to be poisoned in the first place? Oak asked himself. Oak got up and went to drag over some equipment to Mew's bed. Ash watched in curiosity as Oak carefully got a sample of the unconscious Mew's blood onto some sort of thin crystal tray. Oak then inserted the blood sample into some sort of machine which hummed and flashed various colors before a printer spewed out some papers. Oak got the papers and quickly read them. Nodding at the results. What is it, Professor? Ash asked from the chair beside Mew while stroking Pikachu's back, who was laying in his lap enjoying a good petting. Oak looked up from the papers he was reading. Well, I was just wondering why Mew came to be poisoned in the first place, as most mature Pokémon avoid Rikuta trees, as they know very well what could happen, but why not Mew? So I scanned Mew's blood just now with this equipment, and as it turns out, this Mew is extremely young, less than a month old according to these scans. Something else caught Oak's eye while still reading the results. It seems also that this Mew is a female. Ash nodded in understanding before turning to Mew, who was in a deep sleep, oblivious to the world. Ash couldn't blame her. If he had been through such a terrifying and exhausting experience, he too would sleep like that. Ash turned to the professor, who had become totally absorbed by the readouts, lost to the world as he was off to do when he looking at something very interesting. Professor, said Ash, gaining Oak's attention before looking back at Mew. Mew will be okay now, won't she? Ash asked. Oak looked up from the papers and smiled. Don't you worry, Mew will be fine. Oak then frowned a little, although she will be very weak for a little while at least, and there will be some additional medicines she will need to take. Ash frowned a little confused. What do you mean? He asked. Well, while you may have purged her of a majority of the poison, there will likely still be traces of the poison lingering in the lining of her stomach, so she will have to regularly take medicines to encourage healing and to cleanse any remaining traces of poison in her body. There is also the fact that with cases like this where a Pokémon has ingested a poisonous substance, we are unable to use a regeneration machine like the Pokémon Center usually would. Oak gave a little smile. There is nothing more we can do until Mew wakes up, and from the looks of it I wouldn't expect that until tomorrow morning. Ash nodded his reluctant agreement, but then thought of something. Professor Oak, do you mind if I stay here with Mew overnight so that when she wakes up it will be to a familiar face? Oak thought briefly and then nodded his consent. I don't see why not. why don't we get ourselves some dinner and we can turn in early? Ash looked out the window and saw that it was already dark outside. He then looked at Pikachu was already yawning. Ash couldn't blame him, it had been a very eventful day. After having a quick bite, Ash and Pikachu settled onto the bedside couch. It was the middle of the night when Ash woke up after hearing some noises coming from Mew's bed. Ash sleepily looked over and saw Mew twisting and turning as if in a nightmare. Pikachu was already there trying to calm her down but had so far failed. Ash quickly got up and took young Mew into his arms while Pikachu watched anxiously. Ash didn't quite know what to do but had vague memories of his mother doing something similar for him. Ash began gently rocking the pink Pokémon and making reassuring noises, and to his surprise Mew began to calm down rather quickly. When she was finally calm, Ash made to tuck her back in, but Mew began to struggle and made a high keening whine. Ash tried to put Mew down twice more but each time Mew struggled, until finally Ash resigned himself to keeping Mew with him for the night. Ash lay on the bed with Mew propped beside him and smiled when Pikachu joined them. Slowly the three fell to sleep. Chapter 2, A Mew Named Rose. The first thing Mew felt when she woke the next morning was warmth. She took a moment to luxuriate in the sensations before opening her eyes to see where she was. Mew curiously took in the stark-looking but brightly sun-lit room with various bits and pieces lying about. A bed here, a cupboard there, a shelf or two filled with all sorts of paraphernalia. Mew's attention was suddenly drawn to the sound of an opening door, and in walked Pikachu and Ash. Ash was carrying a tray with a small cup of something and a breakfast bowl. Mew's mind was suddenly filled with memories of terrible pain, fear and helplessness. Then she remembered what happened next. Sudden warmth, strong arms lifting her and holding her close, a rather nice smell filtering into her nose, comforting words and nice feeling strokes on her head and body, a glance of worried and compassionate chocolate brown eyes. Then came memories of being laid across a lap and being made to puke up the berries she had eaten just before. The unpleasant sensation of burning heat erupting from her mouth along with an absolutely revolting taste, the sense of being comforted the whole time until it finished, then abrupt and total relief as her stomach stopped burning her alive, then blackness. Mew looked again at the two who had come into the room and saw the same eyes that had helped her last night. He even smelt the same. Mew let out a happy cry. She then tried to get up to fly over and give him a big hug, but while she managed to get in the air she began to feel the world swoon around her dizzily and she fell back down feeling very weak and sick. Ash had smiled when he saw that Mew was up and looking around in curiosity, and then he had grinned when Mew had looked at them and had recognized them almost instantly. Ash's happiness however had quickly turned to alarm when Mew had tried to fly and fallen back down onto the bed. She nearly fell out too. Ash hastily crossed over to the bed and carefully placed Mew back under the sheets before propping her up with a pillow so that she could at least sit up. Ash then sat in the chair beside the bed and placed the tray on front of Mew. Pikachu jumped up and sat himself in front of Mew, who looked at him curiously before also looking at the small cup filled with some sort of liquid and then the breakfast bowl which was filled with porridge and bits of soft fruits such as mango, banana and peach before turning her attention back to Ash. Ash looked carefully at Mew before saying, "I'm glad to see that you're doing okay, Mew, but please don't try to move too much. Your body took a real beating last night and you are going to be feeling really weak and sick for a while yet." Mew's eye darkened with remembrance and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She had come so close to dying. Even though she was so young, she already had a keen understanding of what death was. That is because when Pokémon are born they already highly aware with an instinctive understanding of what's happening around them. This is what allows them to rapidly grow strong enough to battle other Pokémon within a week of their birth, a necessary requirement to survive in the wild. But this of course doesn't mean an instant education, they still need to learn about the world, the do's and don'ts so to speak. Mew of course learned this the hard way, what with accidentally poisoning herself with what she thought to be food. Mew was brought out of her dispirited mood when she felt that pleasurable sensation of Ash petting her head once again, and she leaned into Ash's hand with a purr of delight. Ash grinned. "No need to be so sad, Mew. It will only be for a little while and you will soon be running around and playing as if it never happened," said Ash to Mew, who perked up both from the petting and the reassuring words. Pikachu also said a few words to Mew, who nodded happily. Ash then turned to the tray. "It's time for breakfast, Mew, and then when you're finished we have to go see Professor Oak so that he can give you a health check." Before Mew could eat though, Ash had her drink from the small cup, which turned out to be a medicine of some sort. Mew at first took one sniff and flat refused to drink the nasty-smelling and doubtless disgusting brew, but Ash gently but firmly insisted, after which Mew reluctantly obeyed with a screwed-up face and an irked whine, quickly gulping down the concoction with a body-length shudder and a green face. Ash could only sympathize with Mew, remembering his own experiences with such things. Mew took a great liking to the fruit porridge after Pikachu demonstrated that it was okay to eat. The savory tastes of the porridge combined with the sweet softness of the mango, banana and peach made for an extremely pleasant meal, which even her poor abused stomach agreed with. Ash however eventually had to hand-feed her the rest when Mew's flagging energy failed. Ash even made it into a game, making zooming noises like a plane and flying the spoon into Mew's giggling mouth. Pikachu found the whole event to be very amusing, letting out a small laugh himself, much to Ash's chagrin. Breakfast was soon finished, with a sated and content Mew enjoying a light nap, leaving Ash and Pikachu to clean up. Oak wasn't expecting them for another hour, so Ash left Mew sleeping and went outside to do a bit of light training with Pikachu. Ash had studied quite intensively into various ways of training Pokémon, along with remembering some tricks his father had told him before passing away. Ash and Pikachu started off light with a short warm-up. Ash then guided Pikachu through a series of stretching exercises, both to prevent injury during the intense training to come and to improve Pikachu's flexibility. Good flexibility equaled improved speed and evasiveness, Ash told to Pikachu, who voiced his agreement. Soon enough an hour had passed and it was time to take Mew to Professor Oak. Ash woke Mew up from her nap. "All right, Mew. It's time to see Professor Oak in his lab. He's going to give you an examination to check how long it will take you to recover." Mew nodded and allowed Ash to pick her up into his arms. Mew quickly found that she enjoyed being carried around in Ash's arms. It felt safe and secure, and Mew's enjoyment soon escalated to sheer delight when Ash started stroking her back in pleasurable sensations she was rapidly becoming addicted to. Ash was ignorant to the fact that his absent stroking was turning Mew into a puddle of very happy goo as he was thinking about Oak's examination, although he had taken note of Mew's pleasured purring and just continued rubbing Mew's back. Pikachu looked on in mild jealousy, quite aware of what Ash's stroking was doing to the infant Mew. Though he didn't resent her for it, there would be plenty of opportunities during their journey to indulge in a good petting. Ash soon arrived at an Oak's lab, where he saw Oak working on calibrating some sort of projector. Oak looked up when he heard Ash come in. Oak took note of the rather happy-looking Mew sitting contentedly in Ash's arm, purring away, oblivious to anything else. It looked like Mew was becoming quite attached to Ash. Oak wasn't quite sure what to feel about that. "Hello Ash, you're right on time. Just place Mew under the projector and we will get started." Oak gestured under the machine he was just playing with. Ash nodded and placed Mew on the scanner, much to Mew's indignant displeasure, who let out a sad whine. Ash quickly shushed her and told her to lie still before stepping back to allow Oak to begin the scan. Oak hit a few switches and the scanner began glowing a soft green, which washed over Mew before switching between different colors as different scans took place. Mew didn't really like the sensations pulsing through her body in uncomfortable waves, but stayed still like Ash had told her. A minute later the scanner finished its job and Oak began looking at the results. Ash told Mew that she had been a very good girl, causing Mew to blush happily. Then, after placing Mew down on the floor to play with Pikachu, he crossed over to the monitor to have a look. Ash couldn't make heads or tails of it, so turned to Professor Oak, who was frowning thoughtfully. "Well, from the looks of it, Mew is very lucky indeed. There is some damage still left over from the Ricuta berries, but she is going to make a full recovery, but it looks like it could take at least another week before she's back up to full health," Oak said with a smile. Ash grinned and looked down at Mew. "Well, that's a relief, isn't it, Mew?" he asked Mew, who let out a happy cheer, causing Ash to grin wider before he turned back to the professor. "Professor Oak, does Mew have to stay here a little longer, or am I able to take her with me to my place?" Ash asked, hoping that Mew wouldn't have to stay here for longer. Mew heard the question as well and looked up hopefully. She wanted to stay with Ash. Pikachu also added his agreement with an insistent nod. It was quite nice to have another Pokémon around. Oak looked back at the scans thoughtfully. He hummed in contemplation, wondering if it would be safe enough to allow Mew to stay with Ash. Even he would prefer to keep her under observation for at least 2 more days. It was then that Oak remembered that Ash's mother Delia had once been a student of his before she had gotten PRGN with Ash. She would be able to keep a close eye on Mew's progress easily enough. Oak turned to Ash, Mew and Pikachu with a smile. "Yes, I will allow it." At this the 3 let out a cheer and Mew and Pikachu began to dance. "But," Oak firmly added in a stern voice, causing the impromptu celebration to come to an abrupt halt as Oak turned to look Ash and the others in the eye, "You must promise me that you will not allow Mew to do anything strenuous for at least 3 days. Ash and the 2 Pokémon nodded in agreement. Oak then wrote out a short note to Delia telling her what he wanted her to do and passed it to Ash, who looked at it with confusion, which prompted Oak to explain, "It's just a note I want you to give your mother so that she can keep a close eye on Mew for me, and also before you go." Oak reached over to a shelf where he grabbed a bag of red powder which he also handed to Ash. "This is the medicine Mew has to take, 1 tablespoon mixed thoroughly into a cup of water, 1 in the morning before breakfast, and another in the evening before dinner. Make sure you continue through to the end of the week, at which point I want you to bring Mew back in and I will do another scan to make sure she is healthy again." Ash quickly did a few calculations and realized that Mew had to take the medicine for 4 more days. He nodded to show he understood. It seemed that Mew understood as well, because she was glaring at the innocent package with a look of utmost revulsion. Pikachu noticed Mew glaring at the bag and held back a chuckle, not wanting Mew's ire to be directed at him. Ash then suddenly remembered something very important. "Oh crap. I forgot to call Mom to tell her what had happened." Oak let out a laugh. "Not to worry, Ash, because I didn't. I knew you would forget to call her, seeing as you were more concerned about Mew, so I called last night to inform her of your little adventure. She will be expecting you home, don't you worry." Ash let out a sigh of relief that could have awkward. Ash looked back at Professor Oak. "If there is nothing else, Professor, then we'll be on our now." Oak just nodded his agreement and Ash leaned down to pick up Mew again, who snuggled closer, glad to once more be in her favorite place. Pikachu of course took his place on Ash's shoulder, a habit he had gotten into when he didn't feel like walking. They said goodbye to Professor Oak and started walking back to Ash's home. Along the way Mew looked about curiously at the little town of Pallet. There were a few houses here and there. She could see a small grocery store a little bit down the road. Mew climbed up onto Ash's shoulder and could see Professor Oak's laboratory at the top of the hill. Easily the biggest building in Pallet, one could compare it to a large barn with a round red tile roof and even a windmill spinning about on top. A few minutes later Ash arrived at his home, a white cottage-like place with a red roof. Ash walked in shouting, "I'm home, Mom," and heard a reply from the kitchen. Ash walked into the kitchen to see his mother cooking at the stove, stirring something in a pot. 3 noses sniffed with pleasure. To Ash it smelt like potato and leek soup, and while the 2 Pokémon didn't know exactly what it was, it still smelt very nice indeed. Delia looked up from the cooking pot with a smile. "I'm just about done cooking lunch, Ash. Why don't you and your Pokémon go wash your hands and then we will eat?" Delia then looked at Mew with a smile. "You can then introduce me to the little one afterwards," she said with a kind smile to Mew, who smiled back. She liked this woman. A few minutes later Ash, Delia, Mew and Pikachu were sitting at the table enjoying the soup, which was indeed potato and leek, best soup ever. Delia was reading the note which Ash had given her from Professor Oak, which basically explained what Mew was and its significance, as well as what she had to do while Mew recovered from her ordeal. Delia smiled seeing Ash taking such good care of Mew, who was happily sitting in Ash's lap being hand-fed the soup, which in Mew's opinion was delicious. Delia then cleared her throat with an ahem, gaining Ash's attention. Delia gestured to Mew, "Well Ash, aren't you going to introduce us?" Ash rubbed the back of his head a little embarrassed. "Right. Sorry about that." Ash quickly put Mew on the table in front of Delia. "Mom, this Mew." Ash began with a gesture to Mew, who mewed a shy hello to Delia. "Mew, this is my mother Delia Ketchum," finished Ash with a wave to his mother. "Hello Mew, it's a pleasure to meet you. You certainly are a cutie, aren't you?" Delia greeted Mew with a smile which earned her a cheerful "Mew," to which Delia couldn't resist grabbing Mew to give her a big hug and a pet on the head. Delia cuddled both Pokémon for a few minutes before turning her attention to Ash, who had been helping himself to seconds and thirds. "How long are you going to be staying?" Delia asked Ash, causing Ash to get a thoughtful look. He looked at Pikachu and Mew, who were currently exploring the house, checking all the little nooks and crannies and generally having a good time. Ash noticed that Pikachu was making sure that Mew didn't get in trouble and that she didn't overexert herself. Came with being the older Pokémon, he supposed. Ash looked back at Delia, "At least until the end of the week when Professor Oak does his second checkup of Mew. I guess we will leave for Viridian City after that." Ash then looked over at Pikachu. "In the meantime, Pikachu and I will be doing training together in the forest out back. We will probably take Mew with us so that she can watch, that way we can still get some preparation and ready for the first gym in Pewter City." Delia nodded and then clapped her hands. "Well, there is no time like the present. I'll clean up and you can take Pikachu and Mew and start training." Ash grinned, quickly left the house with Mew and Pikachu in tow. Time to start training. Ash, Pikachu and Mew got a lot done in the 4 days before Mew's next appointment. Ash started out with first working out Pikachu's current level of strength, which, considering Pikachu's young age and also being a former wild Pokémon, it was actually quite good. But in Ash's eyes, Pikachu was barely even tapping his potential. So Ash first began to work out a regular routine of conditioning exercises which Pikachu was to do every day. These exercises included things such as running laps. Ash first set a time limit of about 20 minutes and told Pikachu to run as many laps as he could within the time limit. Pikachu could at first only manage about 8 laps, but he quickly increased it to 12 laps. It may not have seemed like much at all, but Ash had to remember that Pikachu's training was only just beginning. This exercise was to increase Pikachu's physical stamina and speed. Ash also worked out routines for Pikachu's body strength, his agility, dexterity, and flexibility, and his endurance. Ash also made sure not to neglect Pikachu's tail, knowing that there were a lot of techniques that would require it. Some of the exercises would exercise more than one attribute because things like stamina, speed, and agility often went hand in hand. That was all just to train Pikachu's body. Ash then began teaching Pikachu more moves to add his currently low arsenal. Pikachu at first only had the basic attacks such as Thunder Shock, Tackle and Growl. But he quickly learned Quick Attack, Double Team, Thunderbolt and Thunder Wave. Ash knew that Pikachu's attacks were a bit lopsided on the electric attacks where offensive attacks were concerned. But as Pikachu's body was developed, Ash hoped that Pikachu might be able to learn more physical attacks such as Iron Tail, Mega Kick and Mega Punch, or even all three, because all three attacks can be quite fast and could easily be used in a pinch. Ash also made sure not to just leave it at Pikachu learning the attacks. He made sure to have Pikachu master his new moves. What good would a new move do if Pikachu couldn't even use them properly without missing the target, hurting himself or exhausting himself too soon? After Pikachu had learned the attacks, Ash made sure Pikachu could use them by using each of his attacks repeatedly on moving targets, which Ash had set up until Pikachu could hit them every time without becoming too tired. The whole time Mew had been riding on Ash's shoulder, watching in fascination as Ash trained his starter Pokémon and felt a growing desire to join in with Pikachu's training. But the one time Mew tried to join in, Ash was quick to stop her, much to Mew's utmost disappointment. Ash noticed her sadness and promised that as soon as she was fully recovered he would start training her too. This earned him an exuberant hug and a lick to his face as Mew expressed her happiness. Instead of training, Ash allowed Mew to help him with training Pikachu, because around the second day of training Ash had awoken to the sight of a happily flying Mew floating about excitedly in his room. It seemed that Mew flew about a lot because you would quite often see her flying about chasing after Pikachu, cheering him on. Those 4 days were not just about training Pikachu though. Ash spent a lot of time playing with Mew and Pikachu, strengthening his bonds with both of them, and he spent a lot of time talking with them, telling them his dreams and his hopes, along with trying to learn as much as he could about Pikachu and Mew both. Every night Ash would then regale Delia with what he and the others did that day, with Mew and Pikachu inputting their own comments. It was also during these little moments that Ash learned that his Pokémon have some unusual tastes. It seemed at some point that Pikachu and Mew had gotten into the condiments, because one night he had found Pikachu skiing on a bottle of ketchup like he was drinking milk, and Mew was herself skiing on a bottle of mayonnaise. Ash had a hell of a time that night nursing two ill Pokémon who had stomach aches from too much ketchup and mayonnaise. From that point on, Ash would often find Pikachu and Mew trying to put ketchup and mayonnaise on everything they ate, even normal Pokémon food. Ash also made sure to keep his word to Professor Oak, and every morning at breakfast and evening at dinner, Mew got a cupful of what had to be the worst tasting medicine in history. Mew complained many times but in the end obeyed Ash's firm order and drank the disgusting stuff with a shudder and a green screwed-up face. Pikachu and Ash were both careful not to show their amusement at Mew's antics. On the last night Ash was expected to stay in Pallet. Delia asked a question that caught Ash off guard. "Ash, what are you intending to do with Mew when you leave Pallet? Are you intending to make her a part of your team? Or are going to let her go?" Delia asked with a serious face. Ash, who had been in the middle of drinking a cup of water, choked and ended up a coughing fit. It was a few moments before he calmed enough to ask, "What?" Mew had also looked up at Ash, and Delia, curious and a little anxious, what would Ash say? Delia continued to look serious. "You have to remember that Mew is not yet officially your Pokémon, even though you already treat as such. I have been watching you and Mew carefully. It is obvious you have become quite fond of little Mew here, and I don't blame you in the least. She is such sweet Pokémon and very cute." Delia's words caused Mew to blush. Delia then looked at Mew. "Mew, however, adores you. In fact, I would take it a step further and say that she loves you." Ash blushed furiously but decided not to say anything until his mother was finished, else he make himself look an utter and complete idiot. A total bstrd too. Delia looked back at Ash with a small grin. "Mew looks to you as a father figure. Believe me, it is quite common for infant Pokémon who are alone to imprint, you might say, on trainers who take care of them long enough. You protect her, you feed her, you teach her, and you even make sure to discipline her when necessary. I am quite sure very few trainers would be able to force her to take that disgusting medicine. She however obeys you because she respects and trusts you." And do you remember the other morning when she started flying again? Ash did remember. The same morning Mew had regained her flight, she had been so excited she started racing around the house and in the process had accidentally knocked down Delia's favorite vase from atop a cupboard, causing it to smash. Delia had been very upset, of course, and Ash had been forced to take Mew aside to tell her off and tell what she did wrong. Ash had also comforted Mew after she began to cry. Afterwards Ash had told Mew to say sorry to Delia, which she did, and the incident had instantly been forgiven, much to Ash's and Mew's relief. Delia, seeing that Ash understood what she was saying, continued to speak. "There is a danger, however, if you intend to keep Mew. Being a rare legendary Pokémon, there are some people who would do anything to get a hold of her, and there will be other trainers who will want to challenge you for ownership of Mew." Ash's face hardened as he heard his mother speak. He already knew the dangers of could happen if he kept Mew, but to hear that trainers would consider Mew to be nothing but a prize burned him. Pikachu took the moment to tug on Ash's sleeve, getting his attention. Pikachu gestured at a blushing Mew and then to Ash before giving a big nod as if to say that Delia was right in Mew's perception of him. That to Mew he was her father. Ash looked at Mew, who looked back at him with hopeful eyes. Ash just opened his arms and Mew didn't hesitate to fly to him and settle herself into a warm hug. Ash looked down at Mew and felt his resolve strengthen beyond anything before. Ash looked his mother in the eye and spoke with great assurance. "I will be keeping Mew, after everything she has been, though it would cruelty to the extreme to do otherwise." Delia looked at Ash's eyes and saw determination and firm resolve. His father would have been so proud. "I understand, and to be honest quite glad. I was hoping you would. I have become very fond of her." "Which brings me to last thing," Delia said with a grin, and Ash nearly groaned but held it in. Delia looked at Mew. "You don't have to do it, Ash, but I think you should give Mew a name. First reason being so that we can welcome her properly to our family, then it can also be for security purposes. If you ever have to talk about Mew in a public place, it wouldn't do to blurt out Mew in the middle of a conversation, which is sure to grab someone's attention. Instead you could say her name and one would be the wiser except you and whoever is with you at the time." Ash found himself nodding at his mother's logic. Sometimes he forgot how intelligent his mother actually was. Professor does not accept stupid people as students after all. Ash then spoke up, I don't mind at all, but what would I call her? I don't have any good names for a girl Pokémon. Delia smiled, I knew that you wouldn't, so I have already got the perfect name for her. She looked at Ash and said, it is the same name I would have given you had you been born female. Ash despite himself was curious, what was it? Delia smiled and directed Ash's attention to a vase on the kitchen bench which was full of flowers, and Ash looked confused. You would have called me Flower, causing Delia to laugh. Not quite, Ash, tell me what sort of flowers are they? Delia asked with a slight giggle. Ash looked again, I think they're pink roses. Ash ventured, causing Delia to nod happily. She was having fun leading Ash along. And what color is dear Mew? Delia continued, and Ash got a light of understanding in his eye. Pink. So you're thinking of calling Mew Rose? Why that name? Ash asked, wanting to know his mother's reasoning. Delia smiled softly at Mew and Ash. Do you know what the meaning of the pink rose is, Ash? Ash shook his head negatively, and Delia continued, pink roses in the language of flowers means a lot of things, but the pink rose mainly stands for joy, happiness, gratitude, admiration, grace and elegance. Mew is a very joyful and happy Pokémon, always wanting to play, and she definitely has a lot to be thankful for, and she can be quite graceful in the air when she wants to be, so that's why I think she should be called Rose. Ash looked down at Mew. What do you think? Do you like it? He asked. Mew looked down bashfully but gave a small croon to say yes. Ash then looked at Pikachu, who also nodded his agreement. Alright then, Ash began while hefting Rose up into the air. Your new name will be Rose. Ash declared, causing the newly named Rose to cheer happily while flying and spinning around in celebration, but being careful not to hit anything. She had definitely learned her lesson. Oh, has Rose been looking forward to this day? The newly named Rose, aka Mew, has been suffering that disgusting medicine every morning and night for the last 4 days. She along with Ash and Pikachu were on their way to Professor Oak's laboratory so that he could give Rose one final examination, and she could hardly wait for him to proclaim her healthy. A few minutes' walk and they were knocking on Professor Oak's door. When Oak opened the door, he saw Ash with a Pikachu on his shoulder and a floating Mew hovering just beside them. Oak blinked at seeing Mew floating and resisted the urge to rub his eyes, instead greeting them, and directed the three into the medical ward. Ash walked in the lab and sat in one of the guest chairs across from Oak's chair. Pikachu sat on the armrest beside him, but Rose floated down and took a seat in Ash's lap, prompting Ash to absently pat Rose on her head in greeting, causing her to purr happily. Professor Oak eventually came in with a cup of coffee and sat down in his favorite chair before turning his attention to Ash. So it's already that time, is it? My goodness, I hadn't even realized. Oak gave a little chuckle before looking closely at Rose. I must say that Mew is looking a lot better than before. Oak noted the healthy sheen of Mew's fur, the ease of her movements and the clearness of her eyes. Ash grinned. Rose is definitely feeling a lot better, and she is really anxious to stop lying about and begin training alongside with Pikachu. Ash's choice of words caused Oak to blink in shock. Rose? Train? Wait a minute, Ash, are you saying that you gave this Mew a name and that you are intending to make her a part of your team? Oak exclaimed. Ash looked Professor Oak firmly in the eye and said one word, yes. Oak knew right then there was no way he could convince Ash otherwise, and resigned himself to supporting Ash as best he could. That didn't mean he wouldn't at least try to change his mind. You do realize what this would mean, Ash? Mews are probably among the rarest Pokémon in the world and therefore considered extremely valuable both for their rarity and their exceptional power even compared to other legendaries. You and Rose will be targeted not just by other trainers hoping to gain the legendary Mew, but by criminals, Pokémon hunters, and who else. Oak looked deep into Ash's eyes. Do you really think you have what it takes, Ash Ketchum? Ash didn't even think twice. I have already talked to Mom about this, and I'll tell you the same thing I told her. I will be keeping Rose. After everything she has been, though it would cruelty to the extreme to do otherwise, he shouted, and Pikachu and Rose also gave their own shouts. Oak rubbed his ears gingerly. No need to shout, I can hear just fine, thank you very much. Ash mumbled a sorry and Oak sighed. To be honest, Ash, I had actually expected as such ever since that first night when you first started looking after her. I saw you comforting Rose through her nightmares and knew right then that Rose would not be going anywhere. Oak took a sip of his coffee and continued on, I also knew that there would be inherent dangers in keeping Rose and so I have been in contact with some friends of mine at the Pokémon League headquarters. That got Ash's attention. What could Oak be talking about that involved them? Oak looked at Ash gravely. I told them about how one of my new trainers had come across and rescued an infant Mew from death and that you have been taking care of her ever since. I also told them my predictions that the infant would imprint on you and that you would make her a part of your team. We also talked about a lot of other things, but it all comes back to the main reason why I called them in the first place. Oak then gestured to Ash, hand me your Pokédex for a moment. Ash complied, a little confused as to what Professor Oak was going to do. Oak typed away into the Pokédex for about a minute with an expression of strong concentration. He seemed to be entering some sort of code. Oak finally handed Ash his Pokédex back after he finished. Ash looked at this Pokédex and not seeing any sort of difference in its appearance looked inquiringly at Oak, who nodded grimly. What I have just done, Ash, is raise the limit on the number of Pokémon you can carry at any one time, a privilege that is usually only given to trainers after they undergo a vigorous test to show that they can handle so many Pokémon. The battle limit is of course limited to 6 Pokémon in an official battle, but outside you can use up to 12 Pokémon, 2 full teams. Ash gaped in shock. 12 Pokémon. Why would Professor Oak go that far? Then Ash suddenly realized what he was doing. Only 5 days ago Ash would have been jumping around cheering at the top of his voice, but instead he was sitting down calmly as if Professor Oak had only been talking about the weather instead of talking about how Ash and Rose would be targeted constantly, as if they were in the middle of a conspiracy. Sure, Ash could still feel the excitement burning hotter than ever inside, but it seems that it was not only Rose who had been affected by the near-death experience. But Ash still couldn't resist the twitch in his face, which stretched into a grin, and looked Professor Oak in the eye. I look forward to the challenge. Oak couldn't believe how reassured that simple sentence made him. It looked like Ash was going to take this seriously if he was looking at it that way. Oak smiled happily. I'm sure you will do fine if you keep up that attitude for your journey, but of course. Oak held up a finger and gave a wink, don't forget to have fun. Ash nodded cheerfully and found that he couldn't hold it in any longer and began dance around cheering. Rose and Pikachu joined in with him, doing their own little victory dance. Professor Oak only laughed. He should have expected Ash couldn't stay serious for too long. He then looked down at Rose, who was still dancing around happily with Pikachu and not looking pained or exhausted at all. One last thing to do. Oak raised this voice over all the noise. There is just one more thing I have to do, interrupting the dancing trio before stooping down and scooping up a startled Mew before placing her under the medical scanner. Oak looked at Rose, who stared back. Now remember, Rose, don't move, Oak reminded the pink Pokémon with a wave of his finger. Ash and Pikachu watched as Rose was bathed in the familiar wave of colors before stopping after about a minute. Rose had not liked the sensations any better than the first time, and as soon as the scanner stopped, Rose immediately gave her body a shake and jumped into Ash's arms. Ash and the 2 Pokémon watched impatiently as Oak viewed the results of the scans. Before Ash's impatience got the best of him, Oak turned to the trio with a smile. Ah, the joys of youth. Professor Oak said with a thumbs up, I can happily say that Rose is completely revived. There is no leftover damage from the poison at all. Ash and Mew let out loud cheers while Pikachu contented himself with a not-so-loud cheer. Now I can finally start my journey. Ash yelled exuberantly before he was abruptly reminded of something important when he caught sight of a twirling Rose. He needed to officially capture Rose. But he didn't want to use just sort of Pokeball, so. Ash turned to Professor Oak hopefully. Professor Oak, I was wondering if you could help me with something, Ash asked Professor Oak, who nodded helpfully. Well, I am intending to officially capture Rose now that she is fully recovered, but the thing is, I don't want to use just any old Pokeball you can get from a Pokemart, so I was wondering if you would have anything appropriate. Professor quirked his eyebrow in surprise at Ash's request, but quickly began thinking of what he had on hand. Professor Oak then snapped his finger in triumph. I think I have just the thing, Oak declared before he dashed into his office, where Ash and his 2 Pokémon heard a lot of drawers opening and closing quickly. Oak soon came out with what looked a completely white Pokeball with pink highlights. Oak gave the Pokeball to Ash, who looked at it curiously. That Ash is called a Premier Ball, I think you would find that appropriate. Ash looked at the ball contemplatively before grinning. It was perfect. Ash expanded the ball and turned to face Rose, who'd been patiently floating beside him. Ash looked at Rose a moment before lifting the Premier Ball to her eye level and speaking, "Last chance, Rose, do you want to stay with me and Pikachu as a permanent part of our team and family, or?" Ash didn't get to finish his question as Rose didn't even hesitate to rush forward and tap the front button on the ball, causing it open up. Ash watched as the young Mew, who had so quickly and effortlessly integrated herself into his and Pikachu's lives so seamlessly, vanished in a wave of red light into the Pokeball. It didn't even twitch before beeping to signify a successful capture. Everything moved quite quickly after that. Ash had immediately released Rose from her ball, having already determined beforehand that she would prefer to stay outside like Pikachu. They had then said goodbye to Professor Oak and thanked him for all his help. The professor had waved them off, wishing them the best of luck. Ash, Rose and Pikachu had then returned to Delia's home to give her the good news. Delia had been ecstatic at Rose's recovery and that Ash had finally made her an official part of his team. The four had celebrated with an early lunch before it was time for Ash to finally begin his journey, albeit with 2 Pokémon by his side, one of them a legendary to boot. Delia had given a teary farewell to each of them, and of course, just as Ash began to walk off, she shouted the traditional, "Ash, remember to change your underwear." Ash had run off quickly after that, feeling his face burning fiercely, and it wasn't made any easier with 2 giggling Pokémon riding piggyback on his shoulders. Chapter 3, Roasted Bikes, an Eevee, Rockets and Gabite. It was a beautiful spring evening. There was a cool breeze blowing from the east. The sunset was painting a glorious panoramic masterpiece of artistry in various hues of red, orange and yellow with a touch of blue and violet. If one listened carefully, you would be able to hear various Pokémon wandering about. Diurnal Pokémon were settling into their nests for the night along with their families, while the nocturnal Pokémon could be heard in the distance getting ready for their nightly activities. Foraging, playing, battling and whatever else they felt like. But Ash wasn't seeing or hearing any of it. He was concentrating on supervising Rose's attempts in learning an electric attack. While Pikachu was patiently coaching Rose through the process, Ash was intensely studying some information that Oak had placed in his Pokédex in regards to Rose's theorized abilities. Needless to say, he was excited. According to the information that Oak had given him, Mews were said to be able to learn every attack. Ash didn't exactly understand how that could work though. He couldn't really imagine Rose using an attack like Eruption, for example, or maybe Vine Whip. Ash briefly got a vision of a vine sprouting from Rose's back to attack an opponent and shook his head. No, that was silly. There had to be something he was missing. Ash stared at the Pokédex a little agitated and ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Ash lay back in the cool grass and looked up the evening sky, thinking back over all the lessons he took in preparation for becoming a trainer. What was the first thing he should have done when training a new Pokémon? Ash suddenly sat up in realization and couldn't resist palming his face in exasperation. He was such an idiot. He completely forgot to scan Rose with his Pokédex to learn what moves she currently possessed. Ash looked over at Rose and saw that Pikachu was currently demonstrating a Thunder Shock, with Rose watching intently and then trying to do a Thunder Shock herself, but it seemed to be quite difficult to learn an attack that wasn't your primary element, even though Mews were able to do just that. Ash suddenly heard his stomach growl. Ash looked over at Rose and Pikachu. "Guys, that enough for now, it's time for dinner," he called over to the training Pokémon, who let out a cheer before running over and sitting themselves in front of the campfire they had lit before doing a little training. Ash quickly distributed some food his mother had packed into his pack to Rose and Pikachu, before grabbing some food for himself. Ash took a quick bite before shuffling to sit beside Rose and pointed his Pokédex at her. The inbuilt poke scanner quickly scanned Rose. Rose looked in curiosity at Ash's movements while absently chewing on a mouthful of Pokémon food. She quickly swallowed, then pointed at the Pokédex while saying, "Mew?" Ash looked up at Rose's question. "Oh, this?" I'm just scanning you with my Pokédex to find out what moves you already know, Ash replied to Rose's confusion, so she just uttered a small mew, and tilted her head. Ash chuckled knowing she didn't understand, so he scooped her up and placed her in his lap so that she could also see the Pokédex. Rose took a moment to snuggle a bit and made herself comfortable before looking at the Pokédex screen. Ash absently scratched Rose's ears as he looked at her results and then he quickly sat up straight upon seeing her current moves. Rose could transform. Ash already had a vague idea what that could mean, but he quickly navigated through his Pokédex and read up on the move. Ash looked at Rose with amazement, things just got a lot more interesting. Ash picked up Rose from his lap and set her in front of him. Rose, do you understand what I mean when I say transform? Ash asked Rose. Rose took a quick moment to think then nodded hesitantly. Ash grinned excitedly, then I think I have a solution to your problem to learning new attacks. First I want you to transform into Pikachu. Pikachu perked up from where he was eating and looked at Rose curiously, wondering what she was going to do. Rose nodded happily at being able to show off and jumped up high before glowing a bright silvery white. Ash and Pikachu watched in awe as Rose's shape shifted to that of a Pikachu when the glow suddenly receded and she landed before them as a Pikachu. Pikachu called out in surprise before running over to check out Rose's new form. She looked exactly like him. There were a few differences though, being that Rose was a female, she had transformed into a female Pikachu. There was a notch in her tail and her ears were slightly longer. Ash's grin grew bigger. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Pikachu show Rose how to do Thunder Shock again, and Rose, after you master the attack in Pikachu form, I want you to transform back while remembering what it felt like to use an electric attack and then try it in your normal form. Pikachu and Rose nodded and jumped off to do as he asked. It turned out to be a good idea as Rose was able to learn the attack quickly while she was in Pikachu form, being a natural electric type definitely helped. It took a little longer while in normal form, but once she had a feel for it she was able to quickly master Thunder Shock. Ash and Pikachu had both cheered when, as a test of her ability, she had used Thunder Shock in her normal form on a target that Ash had thrown into the air. Rose and Pikachu began to dance together in celebration, and then at the height of their excitement Rose and Pikachu both concentrated and launched a dual Thunder Shock in a random direction. That's when things went slightly downhill. Ash, Rose and Pikachu were startled out of their little celebration when, after Rose and Pikachu had launched their dual attack, they heard two yelps of surprise and pain coming from the direction of the dual attack. The three looked at each other in slight panic and simultaneously began running in the direction of the shouts. It seemed that Rose and Pikachu's attack was much stronger than Ash had anticipated, because they first came across what looked like a roasted and melted bike, with a burnt and smoking, but still twitching, girl lying beside it. Ash groaned in chagrin but kneeled down to give her a quick check over. The girl looked to be round about his age, with orange hair in a side ponytail, with a yellow sleeveless top and cut-off shorts with red suspenders, and while she looked a little crispy, it looked like she was just unconscious. Ash suddenly heard Pikachu calling out from a nearby bush, and after telling Rose to keep an eye on the girl, he quickly got up and made his way through the bushes to where Pikachu was still calling. Ash found Pikachu standing next to a furry-looking bundle, which after he got closer he quickly identified as some sort of Pokémon. Ash got out his Pokédex and pointed it at the brown furry Pokémon, and the Pokédex quickly beeped and said in its artificial voice, Eevee, the evolution Pokémon. Eevee is a unique Pokémon that can adapt to its environment by changing its form and abilities when evolving. Ash let a big grin spread across his face. What luck! Eevee are really rare in wild. Ash looked at Pikachu. What do you think, Pikachu? He said while grabbing out an empty Pokeball. I'm definitely going to catch it. Wild Eevees are rare. But should we catch it now, or should we bring it to the camp for now and then challenge it properly? Pikachu took a moment to think, then jumped up and pushed the Pokeball down as he stood up as tall as he could before smacking his curled paws together and shouting, Pika Pikachu, in a strong cry. Ash smirked. That could only mean, we fight. Ash shrunk the Pokeball then knelt to pick up the unconscious Pokémon. Alright then, Ash said while turning around to head back to the camp while Pikachu jumped up on Ash's shoulder, but we give Eevee the choice of who it battles, because it was not just your Thundershock that hit it." Pikachu gave an indignant yell, but after a look from Ash he reluctantly agreed, seeing as Rose deserved a chance to battle as well. It was later in the evening when Ash heard a groan from his sleeping bag, where he had laid the girl down so that she could be comfortable after being shocked accidentally by Rose and Pikachu in a dual-power Thundershock. Ash watched as the unnamed girl slowly sat up, clutching her head as to ward off a headache. Then he heard a mutter come from her. "Ow. What the hell happened?" "You were accidentally Thundershocked by my Pokémon after one of them was celebrating for learning a new attack," Ash replied calmly before walking over and handing her a water bottle. The girl took the bottle with a small thanks and took a couple swigs to quench her thirst. Ash waited until she was finished before holding out his hand. "My name is Ash Ketchum." Sorry about before," he finished sheepishly. The girl giggled a little before shaking his hand. "My name is Misty Waterflower, and that's alright so long as your Pokémon apologize as well," she replied before asking, "Where is my stuff?" Ash chuckled nervously before pointing over at the remains of her bike where Ash had dumped it. Your bike is over there, and your bag is right beside you," he finished while pointing behind her. Misty grabbed her bag and quickly rifled through it and found that everything was still there, before she turned to have a look at her bike and instantly yelled in shock, "What the hell happened to my bike?" and scrabbled over to gawk at her crispy bike. Misty was about to turn around to demand that he pay her back when a pink something floated in front of her, looking at her curiously. Misty jumped back in shock before tripping over her bike and fell on her backside with a small scream. Misty looked up at the giggling pink feline in shock. Coming from a gym leader's family, she was familiar with a majority of the Kanto Pokémon, even if only vaguely, but she had never heard any mention of this Pokémon. Misty suddenly heard Ash calling to the Pokémon, which instantly flew over to him and settled happily into his arms. Ash had watched Misty fall over her bike with a little amusement and had to stifle a chuckle even after Rose began to giggle. "Rose, come here please," Ash called to his Mew, who zipped over and landed cheerfully into his arms. Ash walked over to Misty while shifting Rose into one arm and then held out a hand. "That was quite a landing. I'm sorry about Rose, but she is very playful," said Ash, still barely keeping amusement from creeping into his voice, knowing that she would not appreciate it. Misty suppressed her anger and embarrassment and grudgingly took Ash's hand, allowing him to pull her up before dusting herself off and looking intently at the Pokémon that had startled her. Misty took in the short and sleek pink fur, the rabbit-like legs, its overall feline-like looks and its long thin tail. She then caught sight of Rose's innocent blue eyes, and any anger she felt for Rose surprising her just vanished. Misty let out a sigh. She could never hold any anger against such a cute Pokémon, especially if it was not done on purpose. She then looked up at Ash and asked, "What is it?" Ash scrutinized Misty closely while he debated with himself as to how much he should reveal to a relative stranger. Ash looked at her again and felt that while she seemed a tomboy and had a bit of a temper, she looked trustworthy. But still, a little caution for now wouldn't be amiss. "Her name is Rose," Ash said while turning to the fire and beckoning Misty to follow. "She's a rare Pokémon I accidentally found on my first day as a Pokémon trainer." Ash sat down in front of the fire with Misty following suit. "She is only an infant who was by herself when I first found her. She had accidentally poisoned herself with Ricuta berries which she had mistaken for food. She is very fortunate she didn't die. If I hadn't found her when I did." Ash trailed off while reliving that fateful day. Ash looked at Misty, who had a sad expression on her face. She looked at Rose with what he could only assume was pity. Ash turned back to Rose, who he had been absently petting much to her enjoyment. "I managed to save her obviously, then I nursed her back to health, then after she was better she didn't want to leave, so I captured her as a part of my team." Ash stared melancholically at the fire for a couple seconds before he suddenly perked up and he looked at Misty with a mischievous grin. "And as to what she actually is, I'm not going to tell you," he remarked with a grin, and Misty felt her anger come back with a vengeance. Ash held up a hand to forestall any protest. "But if you're around long enough I might just tell you." Misty shut her mouth, seeing Ash's serious eyes. "He must have his reasons. I suppose if Rose is as rare as I suspect she is, even I would keep it secret." She instead just gave an angry huff and turned away to sulk in private. Ash and Rose's attention was suddenly diverted from the girl beside them when they heard Pikachu give a little call. Ash put Rose down, who immediately flew over to where Pikachu was watching the wild Eevee. Ash crossed over to the trio to see that Eevee had returned to consciousness and looking around a little confused, until it noticed that it was not alone. Eevee looked at the three curiously before giving a puzzled tilt of its head. Eee. Ash knelt down in front of Eevee. "Glad to see you all right, Eevee. I'm sorry that we shocked you before," Ash said with a grin, and Pikachu and Rose also gave their own apologies. Eevee looked at them before giving a cheerful Eevee. Ash gave a relieved sigh before standing up and letting a small smirk cross his face. Misty, who had been watching Ash curiously, wondered what he was going to do. Rose and Pikachu, seeing Ash's smirk, grinned anticipatorily at each other, knowing what about to happen, and arrayed themselves in front of Eevee, who watched them a little bewildered as to what was happening. Ash reached into his pocket and brought out a shrunken Pokeball and presented it to Eevee, who instantly perked up her ears. She knew what that was. Eevee's tail began to wag slowly back and forth and her eyes shone with anticipation. Ash's smirk deepened slightly. "I see you understand, Eevee," and he put the ball back in his pocket. "To be honest, Eevee, I could have caught you before when these two accidentally shocked you with a thunder shock," Ash continued, causing Pikachu and Rose to blush, "but that wouldn't really be fair on you, so I decided that I would challenge you properly." Ash then gestured to the Pokémon standing beside him. "Both of them shocked you, so you get to choose your opponent." Misty, who had been watching silently, arched one eyebrow in amusement. Ash was actually letting the Pokémon choose. Eevee was a little confused at this human, who was actually letting her choose her opponent instead of just sending one of them out to battle. But Eevee felt her gaze drawn to the pink one, who was now bobbing absently in the air. Eevee had never seen a Pokémon like it and was curious as to how strong it was. Eevee called out while gesturing to the floating Pokémon. She wanted to battle that one. Pikachu let out a yell of annoyance while Rose let out a cheer and did a celebratory backflip before moving to settle in front of Ash, ready to battle at his command. Ash grinned a little before kneeling next to Pikachu, who was pouting due to missing out. He had really wanted to test his training. Ash patted Pikachu between the ears. "Don't you worry, Pikachu, you'll get your shot soon," Ash reassured the dismayed Pokémon, and Pikachu gave a tremulous grin. Ash smiled reassuringly before becoming serious and turned to pay attention to Rose's first battle. Ash took a moment to think back to his father lessons and took a quick look around at the terrain. A wide open space, completely flat with minimal grass cover, a perfect place for Rose's first battle. Ash looked at Rose. "Alright Rose, let's stay on the ground for now and let's start off with pound attack," he shouted while pointing at Eevee. Mew grinned in anticipation and settled on the ground. Normally when Rose stood on the ground she would allow her long feet to be flat on the surface. But when Rose was battling, she stood on the ball of her feet. It allowed easy and quick movement, with strong traction by gripping with her toes, and with her powerful thigh muscles much like a rabbit's she could run very fast. Rose shot forward with a cry and within seconds had crossed the field and was lashing out at Eevee to pound her into the ground. But Eevee was a much more experienced battler and quickly jumped sideways to dodge the pound attack before lunging at Rose with a tackle attack which hit Rose in the side. Rose was sent sprawling into the ground and Ash and Pikachu cried out in concern. Misty, who had been watching from the side, also let out a small cry but stifled it so as not to distract them. "Rose, are you all right?" Ash called out a little worried. Rose let out a pained growl but pushed herself upright and let out a determined cry. "She will make her daddy proud." Ash breathed a sigh of relief before noticing that Eevee was not finished and was running towards Rose, obviously intending to tackle again. "Quickly! Jump over the attack and counter with Thundershock!" Ash cried out, and Rose immediately jumped over Eevee, barely evading the second attack before spinning around and launching a Thundershock in mid-air, hitting the Eevee on the back and causing her to cry out with pain, but it didn't knock her out. Rose had barely touched the ground when the Eevee, having quickly shaken off the attack, dashed at Rose with a quick attack and hit her full on the stomach. Rose was once more sent sprawling into the ground again. Ash ground his teeth in frustration. Rose was being overwhelmed. He should have known that it was too soon to send Rose out to battle. Her training has barely even started. She may have learned a strong attack, but it didn't change the fact she was still an infant. Ash was about to call Rose back when he noticed Rose was looking at him with imploring eyes and she gave a beseeching cry. Ash looked at Rose feeling his resolve weaken. "Can you keep going, Rose?" he called out, and Rose gave a determined cry before forcefully pushing herself up onto her feet and turned to the Eevee who had been patiently waiting for Rose to be ready. Ash clenched his fist before shouting out, "All right, use pound and keep them coming," and Rose ran toward Eevee with a battle cry. Misty watched in awe as the young Pokémon attacked the older Eevee with a fervor she rarely saw even with more experienced Pokémon. Rose was constantly attacking Eevee with pound, trying her very best to hit the stronger and faster Eevee, and whenever Eevee tried to attack using tackle or quick attack, Rose was just able to dodge them, although there were some very close calls. One thing was for sure. That Pokémon had guts. Ash growled as the Eevee dodged yet another pound. Although Rose had obviously gotten her second wind and was proving to be quite nimble, she was quickly tiring. As Eevee was coming around for another quick attack, Ash shouted, "Dodge and then use Thundershock." Rose cried out in acknowledgement, and as Eevee got close she swerved around the speeding Pokémon and quickly launched a Thundershock after it. But this time Eevee used the momentum from the quick attack and evaded the attack much to Rose's shock and came charging at Rose again with quick attack. Rose braced herself again to dodge but was instead taken by surprise when the Eevee stopped short right in front of her and instead used a sand attack. Rose cried out in surprise and distress when the sand attack got her right in the face and found its way into her eyes. Rose instinctively raised her paws to her eyes to cover and rub them, and was therefore completely unprepared when Eevee took the opportunity to tackle her again in the same spot as before, and Rose was again lying painfully on the ground. Ash and Pikachu had cried out in worry when the Eevee had landed that sand attack and followed up with another tackle to the stomach. Ash didn't know what to do as he watched Rose stand again and try to look at Eevee by squinting her eyes, but kept on closing them with a wince as the gritty sand irritated her eyes. Ash gasped as the Eevee once again charged and he cried out, "Dodge left," and Rose immediately dodged the Eevee which flew right by. "Listen for the Eevee to find it and then use Thundershock once more." Rose nodded and kept her eyes closed, while using her hearing to find Eevee. Rose quickly heard some scuffs and thumping feet coming towards her fast and she launched a Thundershock, which unfortunately went wide and Eevee continued to get closer. Rose sent another Thundershock which would have hit Eevee if she suddenly hadn't jumped up as high as she could. Rose looked around wildly, she couldn't hear Eevee. "Rose, look up." Ash cried out and Rose forced her eyes open to look up and she saw through squinted eyes the blurry shape of an Eevee falling fast and quickly shot another Thundershock which overshot once again, and Ash called out wildly, "Rose, look out." Rose forced her eyes open again and saw that Eevee was right in her face and way too close for Rose's comfort. Rose let out a panicked cry, and just as Eevee was about to hit her and surely knock her out, Rose almost instinctively clenched a paw and struck out blindly. She felt a heavy blow impact on her fist and she winced from the unexpected recoil but pushed it through. She then heard a pained cry from Eevee and then heard a body slamming into a tree on the other side of the field, and suddenly she heard Ash shouting out, "Pokeball, go." Ash had gawked at Rose in surprise at the sudden mega punch she had used point blank to hit Eevee in the face and right between the eyes and launch it clear across the clearing into a tree, where it slammed painfully and then slumped nearly unconscious on the ground. It took less than a second for Ash to pull out a Pokeball and toss it at the Eevee, who vanished in a wave of red light into the Pokeball. Ash and Pikachu watched anxiously as the ball twitched for about 10 seconds before it pinged to say that Eevee was captured. As soon as the ball pinged, Ash and Pikachu were running over to Rose, who had slumped panting onto the ground as soon as Eevee was captured. As soon as they reached Rose they were checking her for any injuries, and when they verified she would be okay they both let out a sigh of relief. Ash then picked her up and cradled Rose in his arms as he carried her over to the Pokeball that held their newest teammate and family member. As Ash bent down to pick up the ball he felt Rose stirring and he looked down to see Rose opening her eyes groggily only for her close them again hurriedly as she reached up to rub them. Ash suddenly remembered Rose still had sand in her eyes and he picked up the Pokeball and quickly crossed over to his pack where he grabbed his water bottle and helped Rose wash out her eyes. Misty watched as Ash tended to his Pokémon with care and concern, and Misty allowed a small grin spread across her face. She couldn't help but become intrigued with the rookie trainer who had somehow guided a complete beginner and an infant to victory against a superior opponent and silently wondered how far he would go. She couldn't help but feel that she wanted to see it. Rose's eyes were soon back to normal and she was quickly floating around as usual if a little sorely. Ash looked at her contemplatively as he sat back down next to the fire, and when Rose noticed him looking at her she came closer, curious as to what Ash was thinking about. "So how was it? Your first battle?" Ash's question caught Rose off guard, and Pikachu also looked up in interest from where he had been trying to sneak a poke snack from Ash's backpack. Misty also looked up from where she was sitting just quietly watching the fire. Rose sat down next to Ash as she reflected on her recent battle. Her body was sore, she was completely exhausted and her eyes were still a little irritated, but it had been the most exhilarating thing she had ever experienced. The adrenaline pumping through her veins, the way time seemed to slow down as she focused on her opponent, the feeling of sweet victory she had felt when she had heard Ash successfully capture the weakened Eevee. Rose felt all this and she found herself wanting to do it again. Rose looked up at Ash and Pikachu with a big smile and gave them a happy nod. Ash and Pikachu smiled back. Ash, Rose, Pikachu and Misty had eventually called it a night, and after Misty had eaten some of the food Ash had with him, seeing as she hadn't yet eaten yet, they had doused the fire and climbed into their sleeping bags. Ash had no idea where Misty's bag had come from. Misty looked at Ash, who had allowed his Pokémon to sleep with him. Pikachu was curled up beside Ash's head and Rose had actually climbed in the bag with him and was snuggled up against him, snoozing away quite contentedly. Misty felt her eyes blinking sleepily and allowed herself to fall asleep, but not without one last thought. That she might just join him on his journey, it was sure to be interesting. Morning came quickly for the four travelers, and after breakfast Ash had his Pokémon do their morning workout before they eventually packed up the camp and started walking to Viridian City. Misty, much to Ash's annoyance, had forced him to carry her toasted bike, stating that since it was his Pokémon that fried her bike, then he is the one who gets to carry it to Viridian, where she would have it sent home to be repaired. Rose and Pikachu shared a little giggle together at Ash's misfortune, but did feel a little guilty seeing as they were the ones who were throwing thundershocks around like fireworks. Ash had also let Eevee out of her ball long enough to check on her health and introduce her to Pikachu and Rose before returning her. As they walked along the road, Ash was contemplating on how to train Rose effectively. He absently shifted the bike to another shoulder as he grabbed out his trusty Pokédex. First off, he had to decide what to train her in. Obviously physical conditioning was a must, but what to teach her was another matter. It was good and all that she could apparently use every attack in existence, but it wouldn't really be all that good to just go ahead and teach her attacks willy-nilly without having a need for them or without spending the time to master the move. Ash was beginning to realize how difficult it was to train a Pokémon. The decisions a trainer makes in regard to any of his Pokémon will affect the Pokémon for the rest of its life. Rather heavy stuff now that he thought about it. Ash looked down at Rose's data and current abilities. She currently knew Transform, Pound and Thundershock, and she also had Natural Levitation, which he supposed was a side effect of her being a pure psychic type. Unfortunately, he didn't know a thing of how to train her psychic powers and knew that he had a lot of research to do. Misty, who had been walking along happily while watching the ever-cute Rose play a game of tag with Pikachu, looked over at Ash curiously, who seemed to be in deep thought about something. She walked closer to him and asked, "Penny for your thoughts, Ash," causing him to start a bit and look at her with a little bit of shock. "Don't sneak up on me, Misty," he gasped before calming down to answer Misty's question. "I'm thinking about how I'm going to train Rose," he said while looking at his Pokémon who were now playing in the trees. He looked back at Misty. "Rose is going to be tricky to train properly, as while she is primarily a psychic type which I currently have no idea how to train, she is also capable of learning attacks of every element, fire, electric, water, you name it, and she can learn it." Misty gaped and looked at Rose closely. That tiny Pokémon was so powerful. She looked back at Ash. "You're making it sound like she is some sort of super Pokémon. How could such a small Pokémon do all that?" Misty exclaimed, and Ash frowned. "Don't judge Rose by her size, even the smallest Pokémon can be powerful if trained right, and Rose." Ash looked at Misty seriously. "Rose is special. Misty palmed her face and let out a sigh of aggravation. Just what is that supposed to mean, Ash? Misty looked at Ash, a little annoyed at Ash's reluctance to fess up. I can't help you if you don't tell me anything, she said a little bitterly. She liked the boy, but his obvious distrust hurt just a bit. Ash looked at Misty a little confused. How could you help me with Rose's training? He asked, and Misty sighed but silently pulled out a Pokeball instead of saying anything. Ash gaped and blurted out, "You're a Pokémon trainer? Why didn't you tell me?" Misty sighed again in aggravation. "Yes, I'm a Pokémon trainer and you never asked," she replied in a deadpan voice, and Ash shut up quickly. Misty nodded in satisfaction, seeing her little revelation shut him up, and asked pointedly, "Now what on earth is Rose?" And when she saw that Ash was going to be stubborn, she added, "And if you're worried I'm going to do anything to split you two up, then don't be. I'm not the sort of trainer who splits an infant Pokémon from its father." Misty's declaration caused him to blush, and Misty giggled. "It's obvious that Rose loves you dearly, and seeing you take care of her so carefully last night, you care for her as well. Nothing to be ashamed about." Ash's blush became atomic before he let out a cough, and he looked at Misty out the corner of his eye. "So what sort of trainer are you?" he asked, and Misty smiled happily. "I'm a water Pokémon trainer, and I'm currently on a journey to become a water Pokémon master," Misty declared enthusiastically, and Ash let a small grin cover his face. Misty is obviously very passionate about water types, and despite his misgivings and Professor Oak's warnings, he felt that Misty was trustworthy and he did need a little help. Besides, he had heard that apparently the first gym in Pewter City was a rock gym, and if Rose could learn a couple water attacks, then she would be very good in battles against rock types. Rose is a Pokémon known as a Mew. A legendary Pokémon, Ash said in his confession, shocked Misty right out of Water World. Misty gaped at Ash. "A legendary? How on earth did you get a legendary?" she asked in disbelief, and Ash turned to look into her eyes. "Exactly as I told you last night, I found Rose after she had accidentally poisoned herself and I saved her life," said Ash, and Misty calmed down after the gentle reminder of last night's conversation. She looked at Rose in awe, a legendary right there in front of her. Now she could understand Ash's reluctance to tell her. Ash looked at Misty's awe with a little grin, knowing exactly what was going through her mind, seeing as he had the same thoughts when he first encountered Rose. Of course those feelings didn't last long when he instead had to concentrate on saving her. Seeing as Misty had been staring for too long, Ash cleared his throat, causing Misty to blush and turn her attention back to him. Ash smirked. "So about that help you were talking about," and Misty just grinned. It was late afternoon before they reached Viridian City, and Ash was feeling sore from lugging a 15-kilo bike around on his back, seeing as the tires were blown and one of the axles was fused. As they walked down the sidewalk towards the Pokémon Center where they were going to stay the night, Ash took a look around, taking in the sights and also keeping an eye on Rose, who was currently perched on his head while gawking at her first sight of such a large city, not the biggest city in Kanto by far, but still the biggest place she had ever seen. Ash's attention was suddenly drawn to what looked like a wanted poster, and he walked over to have a closer look. They depicted two people, a guy with blue hair holding a rose and a girl with dark red hair with her hand held out as if to block the camera. They were both wearing white uniforms with big red R's on the front, and they were dramatically shrouded in shadows. Ash wondered for a second if the two in the photo had taken the shot themselves. It wouldn't have looked so dramatic otherwise. "They're called Team Rocket, they're part of a national criminal organization," came an unknown voice from behind him, and he whirled around to see a blue-haired woman wearing a police uniform and looking at him suspiciously. She glanced up at Rose, sitting on his head, for returning to glaring at him. "My name is Officer Jenny, and I have to ask you if that Pokémon is yours and why it's out of its Pokeball," she asked pointedly, and Ash gaped before replying. "She is mine, and the reason she is out is because she doesn't like the ball." Officer Jenny eyed him a little before demanding, "Let me see some ID, young man," and Ash nervously asked, "What sort of ID do you require?" He was also suddenly aware that Misty and Pikachu were looking back at him curiously, wondering what was going on. Officer Jenny hummed before looking up at Rose, who tilted her head in confusion. "If you're really a Pokémon trainer, then you should have a Pokédex issued to you by your professor," Jenny suggested, and Ash nodded and handed over his Pokédex, and Officer Jenny quickly clicked a few buttons checking the registration and nodded when the Pokédex confirmed Ash's identification. Ash suddenly felt his trouser leg being tugged and looked down to see Pikachu trying to get his attention. he then pointed at Misty who was tapping her foot impatiently. Jenny noticed the Pikachu standing beside Ash and asked, "How many Pokémon do you have out?" gaining Ash's attention once more, and he replied, "Just these two," pointing at Pikachu and Rose. Officer Jenny sighed before looking at Ash seriously. "Well, the Pikachu isn't so bad," indicating Pikachu before looking at Rose, "but that one is obviously a rare Pokémon and rare Pokémon are a favorite target of Team Rocket, so I would recommend putting it back in its ball at least while you're in public." Ash frowned thoughtfully. He didn't really want to confine Rose to her ball while in towns, but Officer Jenny made some sense. It was then that Ash remembered something and he got a grin on his face. He took Rose off his head and placed her on the ground, and then said, "Rose, transform into Eevee," and Rose nodded happily before beginning to glow white. Officer Jenny and Misty watched in awe as Rose's shape shifted into the distinctive shape of an Eevee, and before they knew it there was an Eevee standing before them. Ash grinned and picked Rose up into his arms, gave her a congratulatory pat on the head, and Rose mewed in enjoyment. Ash spoiled Rose for a few seconds before looking at Officer Jenny. "Well, that solves that. Is there anything else, Officer Jenny?" And Officer Jenny just shook her head mutely, appearing to be in shock. Ash grinned, putting Rose back on his head, and after hefting up the bike with a grunt, turned to walk to the Pokémon Center. He grinned when he felt Pikachu settle on his other shoulder, and he looked at Misty. "Shall we?" he quipped, and started walking ahead before Misty snapped out of transformation shock and ran after him. A couple minutes later, they finally arrived at the Viridian Pokémon Center, and it was huge. Ash, Pikachu and Rose gaped at the size, but Misty didn't even bat an eyelash, and she walked right in and Ash followed her in. Once inside, Ash looked around for a moment and seeing no one around told Rose she could turn back. Ash waited until Rose was in her normal form before approaching the desk, where he saw a young woman in a nurse's outfit with pink hair. When Ash reached the front desk, the nurse looked up with a smile. "Welcome to the Viridian Pokémon Center. My name is Nurse Joy. How may I help you?" Ash smiled at the polite greeting from the friendly woman, and he placed Pikachu, Rose and Eevee's Pokeball on the counter. He noticed Nurse Joy raise an eyebrow when she saw Rose but ignored it. "I need these 3 treated please, and I need a room for the night as well." Nurse Joy smiled. "Of course, here is your room key and your Pokémon should be ready for pickup in about an hour." She handed over a room key which Ash placed in his back pocket, and then she called out, "Chansey, 3 patients for checkup," and out of some doors to the side came walking what looked like a walking pink egg with stubby arms and legs and a short tail. It also had hair like outgrowths on the side of its head, and it also had a pouch which carried an egg. Ash noticed that it was wearing a nurse's hat. Ash stared curiously and brought out his Pokédex, which quickly told him, "Chansey, the egg Pokémon. Chansey is a kind Pokémon who shares its egg with those who are sick or injured." Ash nodded in understanding before turning to Pikachu and Rose. "You two behave now and listen to Nurse Joy. She going to make sure you're healthy and ready for tomorrow," he told them with a wag of his finger, and the 2 Pokémon nodded in acknowledgement. Ash then leaned closer to Pikachu and whispered, "Look after Rose for me, Pikachu. It's the first time she been separated from me after all." Pikachu nodded in assurance and allowed the Chansey to take them into the surgery area on a trolley. Ash looked after them for a few seconds before turning to Nurse Joy. "Thank you for taking care of them, Nurse Joy, and also be gentle with Rose the pink one as she is still very young," and told her, and Nurse Joy nodded and thanked Ash for the warning before walking through the surgery doors to begin the checkup. Ash sighed before turning to Misty. "I'm going to drop my stuff off in my room, then go to the cafeteria to get a bite to eat." "What are you going to do?" he asked, and Misty got a thoughtful look before answering. "I'm going to send my bike off home, and then I'm going to do a bit of shopping. You might want to do some yourself to stock up on stuff like Pokeballs and potions." Ash nodded and bid Misty goodbye as she walked out and down the road. Ash quickly dropped his bag in his room before going to look for the cafeteria. Ash eventually found the cafeteria and helped himself to a meal from the self-serve buffet before sitting down and tucking in. As Ash was stuffing himself, he was distracted when he heard a roar from behind him and looked around to see a Pokémon he had never seen before. It was dark blue, with a red underbelly that covered from the middle of its abdomen to the bottom of its jaw, and the rest of its underside was a light blue. There were jet wing-like appendages on its arms, then another on its back and another on its tail. On its head there were horns that resembled jet engines, each with a light blue stripe in the middle. It had spikes on its hind limbs, and sharp claws on its feet and its eyes were black and gold. Ash grabbed out his Pokédex to scan it and was shocked when it came up with no data, and he looked up at the unknown Pokémon. "What are you?" he asked it, and the Pokémon just growled. Ash suddenly heard a girl's voice calling, "Gabite. Gabite. Where are you?" Ash looked at the Pokémon in front of him, "That your trainer," and the now identified Gabite nodded before calling out. A couple seconds later the owner of the voice came in and immediately crossed to Gabite. Ash stared at the girl in wonder. She looked to be about 14 years old with long blonde hair that had 4 black hair pieces sitting just above her ears. She was wearing a white coat vest with black trimmings that extended to just above her knees with slits on the sides, similar to Sakura Haruno's but without the circles. She wore a black undershirt with 3/4 sleeves and skin-tight shorts and a pair of black ankle boots finished off her outfit. Ash also spotted a brown utility belt she wore slung over her curvaceous hips, which sported a couple pouches and some pokeballs, and he also happened to notice that unlike Misty, her body was a lot more developed. Ash suddenly became aware that his heart was beating extra fast, and strangely enough, he was feeling attraction to her from some unknown source deep within him, the same source that got him Pikachu. Ash blushed when he saw the girl had spotted him staring at her and looked away, thereby not seeing that she in turn got her own little blush dusting her cheeks. When Ash looked back he saw that the girl was scolding the Pokémon that had snuck up on him. "I told you not to go wandering off, Gabite. What if you had gotten lost?" She then suddenly seemed to realize where she was when she looked around. "Don't tell me you were hungry again," she exclaimed in disbelief, and the Gabite nodded happily. The girl sighed and turned to face Ash. "I'm sorry about that. Gabite wasn't bothering you, was he?" Ash gaped as he caught sight of exotic silver-colored eyes before catching himself. "No, it's all right, he wasn't doing anything. I was nearly finished anyway," Ash replied before holding out his hand. "I'm Ash Ketchum, by the way," and the girl giggled before reaching out and taking his hand replied, "I'm Cynthia White." Ash smiled. "Pleasure to meet you, Cynthia," he replied before looking curiously at Gabite. "I don't recognize this Pokémon and my Pokédex doesn't have any data, so if you don't mind me asking, where exactly do you guys come from?" Cynthia giggled softly before replying, "Your Pokédex doesn't recognize my Gabite because he isn't a Pokémon native to the region of Kanto. They come from the region of Sinnoh, and that is also where I come from." Ash nodded thoughtfully. "Sinnoh is at the northern tip of the country, isn't it?" "What are you doing here in Viridian City?" he asked, and Cynthia smirked. "You're just full of questions, aren't you, Ash?" Cynthia retorted playfully, and Ash grinned bashfully, causing Cynthia to chuckle. "Well, I don't mind. I'm currently here on vacation with my grandmother, Professor Carolina. She's doing a tour of various ruins around Kanto. It's kind of interesting, really, checking out all these ancient places and learning about different legends. I might even think about following in her steps someday." Ash smiled and was about to ask her about Sinnoh when he heard a commotion from outside. Ash and Cynthia were about to check it out when bursting through the cafeteria door came Rose. "Rose!" Ash exclaimed loudly, attracting the panicked attention of the pink legendary, and she instantly flew over to him crying. Ash caught the flying Mew and started reassuring the inconsolable Pokémon as best he could while wondering what on earth happened. Cynthia could only stare in amazement as she watched Ash comfort the weeping Pokémon, which she had instantly recognized as a Mew due to the fact that Mew was quite commonly featured on murals in the ruins she and her grandmother had been visiting. But how did this rookie trainer tame a Mew? What did he do to inspire such trust that it would run to him for comfort when apparently scared out of its mind? Not just anybody could do that. Cynthia was suddenly distracted out of her musings when she heard a loud, "Pika Pie," and turned to see a Pikachu running up and climbing up onto Ash's shoulder. Ash started when he felt a weight settle on his shoulder, but upon recognizing Pikachu he instantly asked, "What happened, Pikachu? What made Rose like this?" indicating the still sniffling Mew, and Pikachu could only shake his head and point towards the door. Ash and Cynthia looked and saw Nurse Joy leaning on her knees huffing and puffing, apparently having run all the way there, and considering the size of the Poke Center, Ash couldn't really blame her. Ash looked at Nurse Joy confused and asked, "What happened, Nurse Joy?" Joy held up a hand and they waited a few seconds before she could answer. Nurse Joy finally got her breathing under control and looked at Ash unhappily. "I had just finished doing the normal checkups of your Pokémon and was about to call you to pick them up. when I remembered that you said Rose was still very young and decided that just in case, I should give her some vaccine shots to inoculate her against some of the more common sicknesses that can afflict young Pokémon. But just as I was about to administer the first shot with a needle, she took one look at the needle and flew off in a panic. Your Pikachu tried to calm her down, but she just took off. I assumed to find you. Ash listened to Nurse Joy's story with growing amusement. He could understand where Rose was coming from, having been rather nervous around needles when he was a kid, but it was rather funny to hear about it from the other side. Ash restrained a chuckle before looking down at a finally calm Rose, who was now purring under Ash's ministrations, and after gaining Rose's attention he said lightly, "You silly girl, you didn't have to be afraid, Nurse Joy wasn't going to hurt you," and Rose looked at Nurse Joy suspiciously before mewling up at him inquiringly, and Ash nodded reassuringly, "I'm sure of it, she didn't hurt Pikachu or Eevee now, did she? I'm sure she didn't mean to frighten you, and that she's sorry if she did." Rose looked back at Nurse Joy, who smiled gently while saying sorry, and Rose nodded in acceptance. Ash looked at Nurse Joy, "Are those shots really necessary?" And Nurse smiled regretfully, "I'm afraid so, Mr. Ketchum. Young Pokémon are highly susceptible to common diseases for at least 6 months after hatching, and the data I retrieved from your Pokédex says she is less than a month old, so yes, they are necessary." Ash nodded in acknowledgement before taking a measured look at Rose, who seemed too reluctant to leave his arms just yet. Ash then looked back at Nurse Joy, "I think I'll come with you this time to keep her calm while you apply the vaccine, if you don't mind," Ash requested, and Nurse Joy, seeing nothing wrong with the request, nodded her acceptance. Cynthia suddenly spoke up, "Ash, that Pokémon, it's a Mew, isn't it?" she asked, and Ash whipped around to stare at Cynthia in shock, and Cynthia nodded, seeing Ash's reaction. "May I join you while Nurse Joy looks after Rose, was it? I'm curious to know how you tamed a legendary." Ash could only nod mutely as he turned to follow Nurse Joy, who seemed to take the knowledge that she was treating a legendary well in stride. Cynthia motioned to her Gabite to follow as she walked beside Ash. Gabite looked back at the cafeteria mournfully before dutifully following after his trainer. A few minutes later they were waiting in front of Nurse Joy's emergency room. Ash was telling Cynthia about how he came to possess a Mew while he waited for Nurse Joy to come with the vaccines. Rose was currently playing with Pikachu, and Gabite having returned to her normal happy self. And that's pretty much it. After having saved her life and then nursing her back to health, she had apparently imprinted on me, according to Professor Oak, and it would have been cruel to send her back out into the wild alone, especially at her age, Ash finished explaining to a spellbound Cynthia. Cynthia couldn't believe it. Ash had pretty much captured Rose through compassion alone. That such a rare legendary would willingly capture itself just to be with this boy, infant or not, is extraordinary. Ash looked around wondering what was keeping Nurse Joy, and he was about to call out when the aforementioned woman finally came out the medical ward carrying a tray with a couple sealed vials and some syringes. "Sorry I took so long, I had to grab some fresh vaccines from the..." Nurse Joy began before she was interrupted by a crashing sound from the roof. Back. What was that sound? Ash, Cynthia, and all the Pokémon looked up only to see 2 Pokeballs had crashed through the skylight, and they watched in trepidation as the ball opened in a flash to reveal an Ekans and a Coughing. Coughing blew out a smoke screen, and Ash immediately called out, "Rose, Pikachu, fall back," while covering his mouth to avoid breathing in the toxic smoke, and Cynthia also called back her Gabite, which quickly retreated to assume a battle stance beside her. Ash briefly checked Pikachu and Rose and saw that they were handling the smoke with only a little discomfort before refocusing on the hostile Pokémon that had ambushed the Pokémon Center. Ash started when Cynthia threw out a Pokeball and shouted, "Use Defog Togetic," and out came a white Pokémon with a long neck, wings with red and blue triangles covering its body. Ash assumed it was another Pokémon from outside of Kanto. "Togetic!" It cried out and began slashing the air, launching blue crescents which forcefully dispersed the smokescreen. Unknown to Ash, however, Rose was watching Togetic intently as if to commit the move to memory before refocusing on her future opponents. Ash and Cynthia along with a nervous Nurse Joy watched as the smoke disappeared to reveal 3 figures standing alongside Ekans and Coughing. Ash gasped when he saw who it was, and he cried out, "I know you. You're those Pokémon thieves from the wanted poster, you're Team Rocket." "Well, what do you know?" the brat knows of us," said a nasal voice attracting everybody's attention. They looked down to see a Meowth smirking at them. Did that Meowth just talk? Ash exclaimed and was answered when the Meowth spoke again. "That's right kid, and if you know what's good for ya you'll hand your Pokémon over," the Meowth demanded, and Ash was about to retort angrily when he was distracted by the other two figures. "Don't forget about us Meowth," said the girl with long reddish-purple hair that stuck out the back of her head like she had soaked it hair gel. "Allow us to introduce ourselves," said the other, a guy with blue hair holding a rose to his lips, and two Ashes, Cynthia's and Nurse Joy's. Growing disbelief and amazement the three went on to sing a poem. Ash didn't understand a thing of what they were talking about, and all he got was that the girl was called Jessie and the guy was called James and that they had to surrender. Their little poem finished with the three striking a pose, and even Ekans and Coughing got into the act. Ash looked at Cynthia, Pikachu and Rose in disbelief, and the three just shrugged. They didn't understand what was happening either. Ash gathered his wits. Nice poem you have there, but I'm afraid I am going to have to refuse. I will not hand my Pokémon to anyone." Nurse Joy also got into the act by stating, "If you're hoping to steal some Pokémon from this Poke Center then I wouldn't bother. There are only sick and weakened Pokémon here that would be useless to people like you. Oh, we're not here for just any Pokémon, we're after any rare Pokémon that could have been found among the trash that is usually here," Jessie clarified with a smirk, and then James spoke up, "But we've decided to change the plan," and Meowth spoke again while pointing at Gabite, Tagetic and Rose, "We're after those three." Ash and Cynthia shouted at the same time, "Forget it," and then deciding to get the first move both shouted, "Rose use Mega Punch on Coughing, Gabite use Slash on Ekans." Gabite let out a roar and dashed at high speed at a surprised Ekans, and using its arm fin slashed at Ekans, landing a direct hit, and launched Ekans at Jessie, who got hit and both crashed through the front door, landing outside. At the same time Rose had flown at high place at an astonished Coughing, and despite Rose's inexperience she hit the slow-moving Coughing with as strong a Mega Punch as she could, where it too hit James on the way out and they crashed on top of the still recovering Jessie and Ekans. Meowth cried out in shock at his partners getting blown away, which gained Ash's attention, and he called out, "Pikachu, quick attack on Meowth, make sure he lands with the other four and then use Thunderbolt on them." Meowth heard the command and whirled around, but was too late to stop an eager Pikachu from slamming into him and blowing him away, where he bowled over a recovering Jessie and James. Jessie pushed herself off the ground and growled, "How dare they do that to us? We're meant to hurt them, not the other way around," and she suddenly heard James cry out and looked to see him holding his Coughing. "My Coughing is out cold. That pink thing is stronger than it looks." Jessie, James and Meowth suddenly saw a flash out of the corner of their eyes and whirled around to see a Pikachu charging up an electric attack. They turned to run, but Pikachu finally launched the strongest Thunderbolt he could, and the three were given the biggest shocks of their lives, along with Ekans and Coughing, who also got hit by the strong attack. Pikachu kept the attack going, making the 5 rockets contort into all sorts of painful-looking poses, and finally Coughing couldn't take it and he blew out a cloud of noxious smoke which somehow caught alight and the gases exploded. Ash, Cynthia, Rose and Pikachu watched in amazement as Team Rocket flew over the horizon. "They're gone. Team Rocket has left building." Ash shouted excitedly before giving Pikachu a big grin. "Nice going, Pikachu. That's some power you have," and Pikachu blushed and rubbed the back of his head, and Rose also showed her appreciation, giving Pikachu a big hug, and Pikachu tried to push her off as she was making him embarrassed. Ash laughed at his Pokémon's antics as Cynthia walked up beside him and commented, "I have to agree Ash, that is quite some power your Pikachu has, more than any other Pikachu I've seen." Rose wasn't all that bad either despite her lack of training. Ash grinned bashfully and was about to comment when he heard steps behind him and looked around to see that Misty had come back. Misty looked around, seeing Ash talking with some blonde girl with a dragon type beside her, Rose hugging an embarrassed Pikachu, and a large patch of scorch marks on the pavement in front of the Pokémon Center. Misty looked at Ash and said, "What did I miss?" Later that night Ash lay in bed with Rose and Pikachu, and as he reviewed the events of the day he had to smile. After Team Rocket had departed, Cynthia had invited Ash and Misty to dinner, and never one to pass up a meal he had accepted, and so had Misty. After Nurse Joy had finally given Rose her shots, with a lot of help from Ash. Much to her annoyance, they had gone to a local restaurant and had an excellent fish dinner. Ash and Cynthia had talked a lot together, and they had even traded phone numbers afterwards, promising to stay in contact. Cynthia had even allowed Rose to examine Gabite so that she could transform into him, which Ash knew would be an amazing boon to Rose's battle style. Cynthia had eventually left to join her grandmother at her hotel, and Ash and Misty returned to the Pokémon Center. Ash was looking forward to the next stretch of his journey. They had to travel through the Viridian forest to reach Pewter City, where the first Pokémon gym is, and Ash was looking forward to catching more Pokémon. Ash briefly wondered what Cynthia was doing before he finally dropped to sleep. Chapter 4, New Friends, Training, and a Rocky Challenge. "What a beautiful day," said Ash, stretching his arms as far as he could, and Pikachu and Rose nodded in happy agreement. It was definitely a lovely morning. The sky was a clear baby blue, stretching as far as the eye can see. White puffy clouds floated overhead, dotting the entire horizon, and a cool breeze was steadily blowing in, bringing with it the scent of spring. The forest itself was lightly sprinkled with dew, the trees and bushes were sparkling like diamonds, and flowers and bushes of all kinds were happily bathing in the life-giving sunlight. Pokémon could be heard all around them, hidden from sight. Rattata were chattering together as they gnawed on whatever they could find. Pidgey were flying around in large flocks, competing to see who could fly the highest, and some Spearow could be spotted sitting around looking grumpy. Yes, it was a lovely morning, and nothing could go wrong. Except for one thing. Aherk. EWU. Go away, screamed a certain orange-haired banshee for what seemed the 100th time, as she kicked away what looked like a brown segmented caterpillar with pink feet, pink nose, black beady eyes, and stingers on its head and tail. Ash had long used his Pokédex to identify this Pokémon as a Weedle. Ash, Pikachu, and Rose looked back at a cringing and trembling Misty with a sigh, and Ash called out in exasperation, "Come on, Misty, I understand that you don't like bugs, but you've been screaming ever since we entered Viridian Forest. Give it a rest already." "No, I will not give it a rest. Bugs are the most disgusting things in whole wide world, and I wish they would all just go away." Misty screamed as loud she could, as if she was hoping that if she screamed loud enough the bugs would listen to her. Pikachu and Rose looked at her in confusion. They couldn't understand what was so wrong with bugs at all. "Not very likely, if anything all this racket you're making is attracting them," Ash said in a deadpan voice, causing Misty to glower at him unhappily. Ash crossed his arms behind his head grumpily. "I mean, why you even following us in the first place? You had to have known that Viridian Forest is full of bug types, didn't you?" Misty scowled grumpily. "When you said we were going through Viridian Forest to Pewter City, I thought we were going to take a bus or something, not go tramping through it on foot." Ash raised an eyebrow in question. "Where's the fun in that? You can't catch Pokémon if you're in a bus, and don't even mention training." "No, I think I'll walk, it's only a couple days walking, no biggie," and with that Ash motioned to Pikachu and Rose, and one again started walking, completely ignoring Misty's threats of painful dismemberment. Ash's thoughts wandered back to earlier in the morning when he had said goodbye to Cynthia. He wished that she could have come along, but she was currently in the middle of training for the Sinnoh Elite Four challenge, and that would be difficult while traveling around. So Ash and Cynthia had said their goodbyes and promised to keep in contact before going their separate ways, but both knew that this was not the last time they would meet. A couple hours and a few thousand threats and dirty words later, Ash couldn't believe the potty mouth she had. Misty had finally lost her steam and was silently trudging alongside them, not even flinching when bugs came close anymore, though Ash could see her eyes were still darting about in paranoia. Ash looked up at the sky and, seeing the sun hanging up high above them, decided that it was time for lunch, and after telling the others walked over to sit under the shade of a large leafy tree. Ash amusedly watched as Misty stomped over and threw down her bag sulkily. She was going to be of no help. After everyone was settled, Ash sent Pikachu and Rose to get some firewood while Ash dug a fire pit. When the two eventually came back, each laden with dead branches, Ash quickly and efficiently arranged the wood in the fire pit along with starter fuel. Then Ash got Pikachu to use his Thundershock in a short burst to set the starter fuel alight. There was soon a warm fire burning away quite merrily in front of them, and Ash then went ahead and set up a basic metal tripod with a metal pot over the fire. Ash then grabbed a plastic container from his backpack full of soup which he poured into the pot. Misty looked at the soup curiously, and Ash, seeing her question, grinned. "Nurse Joy gave this to me this morning before we left the center, along with a lot of potions and heals. She said it was a little thanks for protecting the Pokémon Center." Misty nodded in appreciation. The soup looked very nice. Ash once again dug into his pack and, opening a couple packets of Pokémon food, set them in front of Pikachu and Rose before releasing Eevee from her Pokeball. Pikachu and Rose along with Eevee dug into the Pokémon food with squeals of delight, and soon afterwards, Ash and Misty were also slurping at the lovely soup that Nurse Joy had so graciously made for them. As Ash finished his plateful of soup, he looked contemplatively at his 3 Pokémon. Pikachu was easily his strongest, followed by Eevee and then his Mew Rose. While it was true that Rose had defeated the Eevee, it had been a very close thing, and Ash knew that had Eevee been guided by a trainer, she would have defeated Rose quite easily. But Ash had some plans to change all that. Rose was still only an infant with barely a day of formal training, so it was really no surprise that Rose was less powerful than the others. But if she got some real training, then that could quite easily change. But of course it wasn't just Rose that needed to train. All 3 of his Pokémon were barely even touching their potential, and it was high time to start bringing it out. A task made difficult by lack of training partners, and there was only one way to fix that. "Guys," Ash began, drawing the attention of his Pokémon. "After lunch, we're going hunting," he finished with a predatory grin, and his Pokémon, quickly understanding, returned his grin with anticipatory grins, and Ash grinned wider. "And after that we start training. We have a gym match to prepare for," and his Pokémon cheered. This was going to be fun. The hardest part of when you were looking for Pokémon to catch, is deciding what to catch. Ash had already decided that he had to catch at least 3 more Pokémon, probably bug and flying types, although he might see if he could get a water type as well. There were sure to be a couple ponds around somewhere. Right at the moment, however, Ash was guiding Eevee in a battle against a persistent Weedle. He had already caught a Caterpie, a green caterpillar with red antennae and yellow ring-shaped markings down the sides of its body with Pikachu's help, and now with the help of Rose he had found a Weedle that had wandered away from its hive. Misty had decided to stay at the camp keeping the fire going. Good thing in Ash's opinion. He would have complaints without end if she saw him capturing bug types. This way, even if he did catch them, it was too late for her to do anything about it. "That's it, Eevee, now dodge and use quick attack." Ash watched as Eevee jumped aside, dodging a flying Weedle that flew past like a missile. Eevee then spun around and smashed into the Weedle, which had somehow gotten its stinger stuck in a tree. Seeing that the Weedle was just about ready to faint, Ash expanded a Pokeball and threw it at the weakened Pokémon. Ash watched as the Weedle vanished into the Pokeball in the typical flash of red light. The Pokeball only twitched for a couple seconds before it pinged loudly, signifying that the Pokémon was caught. Ash grinned and Eevee let out a cheer before running over to Ash, who kneeled down and gave a congratulatory pat and a happy, "That was great, Eevee," and Eevee exuberantly nuzzled against her trainer. While Ash was tending to Eevee, he watched as Rose flew over and picked up the Pokeball before flying back to Ash, who gave Rose a smile as she dropped the Pokeball into his hand. "Thanks, Rose," he said appreciatively, making Rose smile and spin and flip around playfully. Ash finished congratulating Eevee before standing up and clipped Weedle's Pokeball to his belt before running his fingers gently over the others. Ash grinned a little smugly. He now had 5 Pokémon, just one short of a full team. He glanced at Rose, Pikachu and Eevee, who were patiently waiting for him while talking with each other. Ash briefly wondered what they were talking about before focusing on his next objective, finding a flying type. Ash clapped his hands, attracting his Pokémon's attention. "Alright, we have one more Pokémon to find today, a flying type, and after that we start training." The Pokémon all nodded happily and Ash smirked, "Let's go," and took a step when Rose cried out excitedly. Ash turned around to see that Rose was pointing up into the sky animatedly, causing Ash and the others to look up too. Ash squinted against the sun, not seeing anything, and shaded his eyes from the sun. Ash suddenly saw a shadow framed against the sun, but was unable to see much else. Ash pulled out his Pokédex hoping that it could identify the flying Pokémon, and the Pokédex quickly beeped in acknowledgement and blared out, Pidgeotto, an evolved form of Pidgey. It is armed with sharp claws and dives from the sky to capture its prey. Unlike the more gentle Pidgey, Pidgeotto can be more dangerous. Approach with extreme caution. Along with the explanation, the Pokédex also gave a picture. It showed a large raptor-like bird. Its primary color was brown, but its plumage was much more elaborate than its pre-evolved form. Its head crest was much longer and a reddish color. The plumage of its tail was also quite colorful, alternating between red and yellow. It had pinkish-gray feet and black markings around its eyes. It also had powerful talons to grasp prey. Ash lowered his arm to look at Rose with a grin. Nice spotting, Rose, you have some good eyes there, and Rose rubbed her head bashfully, looking rather pleased with herself. Ash looked back up at the vague speck high in air, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. The problem is how to get it down. Ash looked at Pikachu. Do you think you can hit Pidgeotto from here, Pikachu? Pikachu looked up at the small speck and shook his head no. Ash frowned and briefly looked at Eevee before dismissing the thought, and looked instead at Rose. Rose could fly with unmatched agility and movement, and she had ranged attacks. All she had to do was weaken it, then draw it down to where Pikachu could finish it. Rose, you're up, Ash called out, drawing Rose's attention, and Ash caught her eye and she drifted closer. We can't capture Pidgeotto from down here, so it's up to you to bring it down. Rose looked shocked at first, looking up at the circling bird of prey, then looking down, feeling a little unsure. She had heard the Pokédex very clearly about Pidgeotto, and she wasn't sure she could defeat such a Pokémon yet. Ash noticed her uncertainty and he placed his hand under her chin, lifting her up to look in his confident eyes. All you have to do is bring it down here, fly as fast as you can to surprise it, use Thundershock first to stun it from underneath, then fly above it and knock it down with Mega Punch, he told her assuredly with a smile, and seeing her starting to perk up said, you can do it. His little encouragement must have worked because Rose's eyes firmed up with resolve and she nodded with determination. Ash beamed with pride and he rubbed Rose's head, saying, do as I said and you'll be fine, before stepping away and yelling, go. Rose nodded and braced herself as if to jump, and with a flare of power and a battle cry she exploded up into the air as if shot out of a cannon towards Pidgeotto. Ash, Pikachu and Eevee watched in stunned amazement as Rose rocketed towards Pidgeotto, and Ash mumbled to himself, Mew. The legendary Pokémon. As Rose approached the Pidgeotto she braced herself for the upcoming engagement, and when she was close enough she focused her power and with a cry let loose a Thundershock. Poor Pidgeotto didn't even know what hit her. One moment she was enjoying the warm thermal air currents that carried her far above the ground, then the next moment she was yelling in pain and shock when she felt the unmistakable waves of electricity zap through her body and setting every nerve on fire. Fighting through the pain, Pidgeotto hurriedly looked around searching for her attacker and spotted a pink blur strkng at her from below. Pidgeotto screeched angrily, and even though there were still aftershocks traversing her body she forced her body to turn towards the unknown pink Pokémon. Rose continued charging at the Pidgeotto even though the Thundershock didn't look to have done much. Rose was nearly taken by surprise then when Pidgeotto suddenly flapped her wings in one strong sweep and burst towards her at great speed, clearly using quick attack. Rose quickly flipped to one side, barely missing the white and brown streak that was Pidgeotto, although she was still buffeted by the wake of displaced air. Rose was now above Pidgeotto and narrowing her eyes at the still mobile Pidgeotto. Rose launched another Thundershock and quickly followed after it, intending on following up on her attack. This time Pidgeotto saw the Thundershock and quickly back swept her wings, causing her to move backward slightly, and the Thundershock overshot in front of her. Pidgeotto sighed relief when she successfully evaded the Thundershock, but her relief didn't last long when Rose abruptly reminded Pidgeotto that her opponent wasn't finished, by suddenly appearing in a pink blur and striking out with a Mega Punch. Mega Punch, a fighting type move that was normally ineffective against flying types, main reason being that most fighting type Pokémon can't fly, so one can understand when Pidgeotto didn't know what to do but feel shock when Rose's Mega Punch landed square in her chest, the directed force of the punch blowing her at great speed towards the ground and, more importantly to Rose, towards Ash. Ash, who had been watching anxiously from the ground, hissed a quiet, "Yes," triumphantly, but could see that Pidgeotto wasn't going to land exactly as planned and called out to Pikachu and Eevee, "Come on," before beginning to sprint in the direction that Pidgeotto was falling. Pidgeotto continued to fall and Rose kept pace with her to make sure that she not only came down but that she didn't crash into the unforgiving ground. Neither she nor Ash wanted Pidgeotto to die. Ash continued to run after Rose and Pidgeotto with Pikachu and Eevee running alongside him. As they ran, Ash made an idle comment to Pikachu, "Looks like you won't be needed after all, Pikachu. Looks to me like Rose has things under control," and Pikachu let out a peeved "Pika," causing both Ash and Eevee to laugh, making Pikachu blush. However, it seemed that Ash spoke too soon. As Rose drew closer to Pidgeotto to check on her, Pidgeotto's eyes snapped open and her clawed feet lanced out to grab Rose by her arms, completely immobilizing Rose, and just like that the tables were turned. Rose cried out in shock and fear and started struggling against Pidgeotto's tight grip, even tried to fly away, but that only slowed the fall, and Pidgeotto's only response was to tighten her grip, digging her sharp claws into Rose's arms, making her wince from the pain, tears emerging from her eyes. Rose looked up into Pidgeotto's eyes and could easily see that Pidgeotto was quite angry. Back on the ground, Ash stopped in shock seeing Rose's plight and shouted out, "Rose!" He desperately looked at Pikachu, "Can you shoot that far?" Pikachu looked up and anxiously, and seeing them only 100 meters in the air, shouted an affirmative, "Pika." "Then shoot a thunderbolt around them, see if we can't distract Pidgeotto enough so that Rose can break free." Ash ordered calmly, if a little tightly, and both Pikachu and Eevee could see that he was trying to control his worry. Pikachu nodded and looked back at Pidgeotto and Rose hovering above them. Pikachu effortlessly focused his power and with a bellow hurled a thunderbolt just beside the two Pokémon. Pidgeotto visibly flinched and Ash instantly shouted as loud he could, "Rose! Use Thundershock again and then kick yourself away." Rose heard Ash's shout and she suddenly remembered that she was not alone. Her heart swelled once again with courage as she heard Ash's voice again in her mind, "Do as I said and you'll be fine. You can do it." Rose blinked away her tears and instantly let loose a defiant cry as she blasted Pidgeotto with Thundershock. Pidgeotto screeched with pain as she felt that cursed lightning a second time. The lightning caused her body to convulse and Pidgeotto's claws involuntarily snapped open, releasing Rose, who instantly kicked Pidgeotto in the gut with both feet. The double blow forced her away from Pidgeotto and also caused Pidgeotto start falling uncontrollably towards the ground. Ash, Pikachu and Eevee cheered when they saw Rose break free, but when Ash saw that Pidgeotto was nearly unconscious and unable to control its fall, he started running after it. As he ran, he pulled out an empty Pokeball from his jacket and expanded it. Seeing Pidgeotto was falling faster as it succumbed to gravity, Ash started running faster as well. Ash swerved around trees, batted branches out of the way, jumped off a small ledge, disturbing a nest of Weedle in his desperate rush to save Pidgeotto. He could hear Pikachu and Eevee following along behind him, and he could see Rose above them flying towards Pidgeotto as well. All of a sudden Ash and the other burst into a large clearing, and as he ran he saw that Pidgeotto was about to hit the ground. Ash threw his arm back, twisted his leg and then heaved his arm forward while shouting, "Go Pokeball!" The Pokeball shot towards Pidgeotto like it had been thrown by a professional baseball pitcher, and less than 2 meters off the ground the Pokeball hit an unconscious Pidgeotto, who vanished in that familiar wave of red light into the Pokeball, which then fell safely to the ground. Ash, Pikachu, Eevee and Rose, who had arrived just seconds before, watched with bated breath as the Pokeball wiggled for at least 30 seconds. It seemed that although Pidgeotto had taken 2 Thundershocks, a Mega Punch and a kick in the gut, it still had a lot of strength. Finally the wiggling stopped and the Pokeball pinged its happy tone, indicating that Pidgeotto was finally captured. Ash and all the Pokémon slumped to the ground in relief. After about a minute of lying together on the ground, Ash finally sat up and dragged Rose into his lap, where he gently turned her to sit facing him. Ash patted Rose on head and gently said, "That was fantastic, Rose, such a brave girl." Rose blushed a bright red, which considering her pink fur was quite a feat, and after Pikachu and Eevee also gave their own compliments her blush got even deeper. Rose eventually resorted to hiding her blush in Ash's chest, and he just chuckled instead, holding her closer in a hug, and Rose nuzzled him back, enjoying his warmth. Ash didn't bother to put Rose down when he finally stood up, instead hoisting her up into his arms as he walked over to Pidgeotto's Pokeball. After he had picked up and shrunken the Pokeball, he also returned Eevee, before turning to Pikachu and Rose. "Time to head back to camp, guys. That's all for today. After that near accident just now, I don't think any of us really want to train, and I also have to treat Pidgeotto, Weedle and Caterpie for any injuries," Ash said with a tired voice, and Pikachu and Rose nodded in agreement. It was for the best. It was at least an hour later before Ash and Co returned to the camp. They returned to find that Misty had not been idle while he was out searching for Pokémon. She had not only made sure that the fire did not go out, but she had also, much to Ash's gratitude, made dinner. It wasn't much, just some packet noodles and dried meat cooked together in the pot with a bit of seasoning. She had also apparently been training the Pokémon she had on her, a Staryu and a Starmie. She also had a Goldeen, but she couldn't really train that Pokémon without a large source of water. Before Ash ate, however, he released all his Pokémon so that they could eat as well. There was a little bit of displeasure expressed from Misty when the two bug types were first revealed, and she started shouting at them, frightening them quite a bit. But Ash quickly put a clamp on that, stating that whatever feelings and opinions she had about bug types, they were her opinions and feelings, and that he did not share them at all, and that she had no right to demand Ash send them away. They were his Pokémon, not hers. He then suggested that she should just ignore them if they were really that bad, instead of shouting at them and making them feel bad. Misty sulked a little after that, but did as he suggested and ignored the two bug types, much to their relief, although Caterpie seemed quite upset that Misty didn't like it. Just before dinner was served, Ash quickly did a check over of his newest acquisitions. Caterpie and Weedle were just fine, and all Ash had to was administer a little potion to a couple bruises. Pidgeotto was a little bit worse though, but not too bad considering it could have been much worse. A little Parla's heal and some super potion, and Pidgeotto was quickly right as rain. There was a bit of tense moment when Rose and Pidgeotto were properly introduced. Ash had watched nervously as Pidgeotto looked intensely at an anxious and rather small-looking Rose. A tense minute later, Pidgeotto cooed softly and rubbed a wing on Rose's cheek, and Rose cooed back happily before jumping up and giving a startled Pidgeotto a swinging hug around the neck. Ash sighed with relief, grateful that Pidgeotto had forgiven Rose, before happily distributing Pokémon food to his Pokémon, who all dug in enthusiastically, all the while idly talking with each other. Ash asked Misty if her Pokémon needed anything. She declined politely, saying that they had already been taken care of. Later that evening we see Ash and Pikachu laying next to the fire, staring up at the night sky as they contemplated the upcoming future. Everyone else was asleep. The Pokémon had been returned to their ball for the night. Misty was in her sleeping bag mumbling quietly to herself in her sleep, and Rose had been placed into Ash's sleeping bag. Ash could hear her quiet breathing and absently wondered what sort of young innocent dreams she was dreaming. Ash looked over at the fire and saw that it was nothing but red-hot coals, and so quietly got up to chuck a piece of wood onto the fire to keep it burning. When he sat back down, he looked over at Pikachu reflectively, who was also enjoying the peace and quiet of the night. "Pikachu, I've been meaning to talk to you about something," Ash said solemnly, attracting Pikachu's attention, who then hopped over to sit in front of Ash. Ash looked at Pikachu meditatively. "I've been meaning to ask you how you felt about Rose," he said somberly, and Pikachu just tilted his head in question. Ash understood Pikachu's little question and answered, "I mean, you are my starter Pokémon, but ever since Rose came into our lives I haven't been able to pay as much attention to you as I would have done otherwise. Rose is so young, childlike, and a very affectionate Pokémon. It would hurt her deeply not to return her affection, and so I find myself spending a greater amount of time with her than with you, and I was just worried how you were feeling about it." It seemed that Ash needn't have worried, because Pikachu gave a little smile and with a coo jumped up and gave Ash an affectionate hug of his own, causing Ash to chuckle and return Pikachu's hug. Ash eventually pulled back to ask, "You don't mind then, about Rose?" and Pikachu just shook his head no. Ash chuckled, "I guess you're rather fond of her yourself, huh Pikachu?" and Pikachu grinned while nodding yes, he was rather fond of Rose. It was rather hard not to be. Ash and Pikachu spent a few moments in reminiscence before Ash suddenly remembered something. "Hey Pikachu. Ash asked, making Pikachu look up curiously. You know how Professor Oak expanded my Pokémon limit to 12 Pokémon, said Ash, and Pikachu nodded, wondering what Ash was on about now. Ash placed Pikachu back on the ground before continuing. Well, 12 Pokémon is a lot of Pokémon to keep track of, especially if things have gone wrong, so I've been thinking that I might actually split them into 2 teams of 6, with a team leader to look after them, answering only to me, their trainer. Pikachu looked up in disbelief. Was Ash saying what Pikachu thought he was? Ash looked at Pikachu seriously. I'm going to make you one of the team leaders, Pikachu. During this whole situation with Rose you have shown that you can be mature and very tolerant, and your strength and power is exceptional compared to other Pikachu. You are smart and your will is strong. All of these characteristics are essential for a team leader. During Ash's explanation of Pikachu's virtues, Pikachu continued to gain a bigger blush and started to get more nervous. Ash noticed Pikachu worry and grinned reassuringly. Oh, don't worry, Pikachu. I'm not going to just throw you off the deep end. As your training progresses and as I capture more Pokémon, I'm going to steadily give you more and more responsibility, and if it should all go well, you should be able to make appropriate decisions without me being there, so if something should happen, an accident or something, then you will be able to take command in my stead. So what do you say, Pikachu? Will you accept my proposal? Ash finished holding out his hand. Pikachu was struck speechless with Ash's faith in him. Pikachu finally gathered what was left of his dignity and resolve, and taking Ash's hand with both paws, declared his agreement. After Ash and Pikachu made their plans for tomorrow, they finally turned in. They had a lot to do tomorrow. Over the next few days, Ash and Co fell into a simple routine as they made their way through the Viridian forest to Pewter City. Every morning they would get up early and have breakfast, then Ash, Pikachu, Rose and the other Pokémon would do their morning training. On first day, Ash went over the current strengths and weaknesses of all 6 of his Pokémon and devised physical routines for them. Pikachu was the easiest, seeing as most of his normal routine was already worked out. The one difference was there was more emphasis on Pikachu's tail. During talks with Misty, Ash had learned that Brock Stone, the current gym leader of Pewter City, was a rock specialist. So Ash, after some careful consideration with his Pokédex on Pikachu's available moves, chose to teach Pikachu Iron Tail, Brick Break and Agility, which he hoped would effective moves, not just in the battle with Brock but also in future battles. So in addition to his normal routine of laps, evasive and agility training and toughness training, attack training and electric training, Pikachu also had to drastically strengthen his tail and arm by doing weights. Ash also decided to start training Pikachu in Mega Punch like Rose had, for those moments where Pikachu is in very close combat. Needless to say, Pikachu was very sore by the time training finished. Rose got a routine very much like Pikachu's, with a lot of physical conditioning and skills training. While Ash was designing Rose's routine, he wondered how exactly he could get maximum benefit out of her training without straining her overly much. Rose's natural instinct was to float when moving around, but Ash knew that in order to strengthen her body she had to use it, and she couldn't do that while floating in mid-air. While he was idly watching Pikachu run his laps, Ash was struck by how Pikachu's running utilized every muscle in his body, even his tail muscles kept his tail from dragging on the ground. Ash suddenly got an interesting idea. This idea required the use of a certain ability Rose had been gifted with, but it needed testing first. So Ash got Rose to first transform into Pikachu, then he had Rose join Pikachu in his routine. Ash was making sure that any physical exertion that Rose did while transformed, translated over into Rose's normal form. It did. So from then on, part of Rose's routine was to transform into other Pokémon, not just Pikachu though, in order to do her physical training. In regards to her skills training, Ash not only had her train in the Iron Tail technique alongside Pikachu, but he had her properly master Mega Punch. Then he also taught her Brick Break, a relatively simple move, that can damage a wide variety of opponents while also destroying special defenses, and with the help of Misty's water expertise he taught her Water Gun and Bubble Beam. Staryu and Starmie got a lot of exercise that week. Ash of course didn't forget to make sure that Rose also practiced her flying. Idly floating around was one thing, mid-air combat maneuvers was something else entirely. Fortunately Rose had a flying partner in the form of Pidgeotto. Pidgeotto's training was a little bit different from Pikachu and Rose's training, but still quite similar. There was of course the normal physical training. Ash actually made Pidgeotto run on the ground, thinking that the best way to strengthen Pidgeotto's feet and legs would be to run. Ash also scanned Pidgeotto with the Pokédex and found that Pidgeotto currently knew Gust, Quick Attack, Tackle and Sand Attack. A big part of Pidgeotto's training was training to get faster in the air. Ash was hoping to get Pidgeotto fast enough that she could learn agility. Ash also had her train with some ranged attacks and close range attacks, specifically, Twister, Wing Attack, Aerial Ace and Air Slash, but it was slow going because so far Pidgeotto had only mastered Wing Attack. Pidgeotto's wings were not nearly strong enough yet, but they were a good goal to work for. Maybe later he could train Pidgeotto to use Close Combat. Eevee was rather simple to set a routine for after Pikachu and Rose. Ash just sent Eevee to train with Pikachu and Rose during their workouts, seeing as Eevee was actually rather similar to Pikachu in body type. Ash again scanned Eevee with his Pokédex and found that she currently had Tackle, Quick Attack and Sand Attack and Bite. Ash decided that Eevee had enough close-range attacks for the moment and started training Eevee in Shadow Ball. Unfortunately there wasn't really all that much information on the attack and without an example to see Eevee didn't know what the attack looked or felt like. But like Ash, Eevee was very stubborn, and kept on working on Shadow Ball while keeping up her workouts with Pikachu and Rose. Eevee eventually managed to get a black spark started in her mouth but not much more than that. The most progress was made with Caterpie and Weedle. Unfortunately Ash couldn't really put them through the same levels of training he could the others, at least before they fully evolved. So he set them to just sparring against each other, and whenever one of the others was free they would spar against them as well. There is an interesting and important fact about larval bug types: they evolve fast. So on the second day of training, after an intense 2-on-2 sparring match against Pikachu and Eevee, both Caterpie and Weedle evolved. Ash, Pikachu and Eevee had watched in awe as Caterpie and Weedle both seemingly covered themselves with string shot, before glowing a bright white much like Rose did while transforming, and when the glowing stopped, Caterpie and Weedle had been replaced by Metapod and Kakuna. Metapod pretty much looked like a long, curved green cocoon with eyes on the side, while Kakuna was also cocoon-like, with a domed head, triangular eyes and what looked like scythe arms held close to its body. Ash and Pikachu let out a cheer which attracted the attention of everyone else. Rose was most put out that she missed it. After evolving however, the two Pokémon both became pretty much dormant, though Ash knew that it would have happened. Ash himself did not just stand around letting his Pokémon do all the work. Ash also came up with a workout routine of his own so that he could train alongside with them. Something that he remembered his father did with his Pokémon. He said that it helped to develop strong bonds with all his Pokémon. If the Pokémon saw that the trainer was willing to train with them, it encourages them to do their very best, and Ash saw no reason to suspend this noble Ketchum tradition. All in all, Ash finally got a lot of quality training done. Pikachu was stronger than ever and Rose finally had confidence in herself as a battler, and while she was still not quite as strong as Pikachu, she was rapidly catching up. Pidgeotto finally managed to master agility, and was well on her way to mastering Twister. Eevee was also becoming quite the fighter, but she still couldn't get that Shadow Ball right. Metapod and Kakuna were still dormant, and according to the Pokédex they could be like that for up to 2 weeks. "Are we there yet?" came a tired feminine voice. Ash looked behind him to see an exhausted-looking Misty. Ever since they had entered the Viridian forest she had not had a decent night's sleep, because she kept having nightmares of bug Pokémon. "Not yet, Misty. Just a couple more miles." Ash sighed and looked at Pikachu and Rose who were currently riding on Ash's shoulders. "Do you think we should have left Misty back in Viridian? She's been helpful with training Rose in water attacks, but the rest of time she has been nothing but a pain." Pikachu looked back at Misty before turning back to Ash and gave a resigned shrug. Rose just sighed and Ash nodded in resignation. "You're right. Even if we had left her there she would have just come to find us. She is determined to make us pay for the bike." Ash was suddenly interrupted by an aggravated cry from Misty and he turned to see her glaring at him. "That's what you said an hour ago, Ash, and yet here we are." Ash was about to shout back when he suddenly found himself coming upon a ridge. Ash walked to edge and looked out at the horizon to see a sight that made him sigh with relief. This would cheer Misty up. They were finally at Pewter City. Ash looked out at the city with interest. It was smaller than Viridian City, it was rather rustic looking and some of the houses looked like they were made of stone. In the distance Ash could see the Pewter City Science Museum along with a large hall-like building which Ash knew held contest battles, but he had no present interest in that. Ash felt Misty come trudging up beside him and he glanced sideways at her to see her reaction. He also couldn't help but take in her appearance. She looked extremely bedraggled, her posture was limp, she had bags under her eyes, her face and clothes were smudged and her entire presence screamed forlorn. But when Misty looked up and saw Pewter City her persona suddenly did a 180 from forlorn waif, to an upbeat and perky schoolgirl. "I shotgun the shower." Misty shouted enthusiastically and then seemingly vanished. Ash blinked in surprise at the spot where Misty was before spotting a trail of smoke and dust that vanished into the city. Ash stared after Misty. Where did she suddenly get the energy to do that? He stuttered, dumbfounded, and Pikachu and Rose uttered their surprise. Ash rubbed his head. "I'll never understand girls, one moment they're exhausted, then all of a sudden they're running the 100-meter sprint like they're in the Olympics," and Pikachu and Rose nodded their agreement. Ash sighed in resignation. "Well, whatever, no need for me to worry if she can move like that." Ash then looked at Rose. "Better transform into Eevee while we're here, Rose, no need to attract too much attention." Rose nodded cheerfully and was overtaken by that familiar glow as she shape-shifted into Eevee. Ash nodded in satisfaction before starting to make his way into Pewter City and to the Pokémon Center. As he made his way into town Ash took a good look around. It was certainly busier than Pallet Town, but unlike Viridian City there was a laid-back feel to the town. All the residents strolled along in a relaxed fashion, and they all greeted each other with a smile. Ash found himself rather liking this town, with its friendly laid-back people, and houses made of various colored stones. Ash soon found the Pokémon Center, a pyramid-like structure with a lot of windows and an aerial on top. When Ash went inside he looked around before walking to the front desk where he saw Nurse Joy. Ash was a little confused seeing Nurse Joy before he remembered hearing from Professor Oak that the nurses at the Pokémon Centers all related to each other and nearly all looked the same. Shrugging off this surprise he rang the bell to get the nurse's attention. "Oh, hello, how may I help you today?" said Nurse Joy with a friendly smile, and Ash smiled back. He looked down at Rose. "You can turn back now, Rose," and Rose squealed happily before shifting back into her normal form. Nurse stared in surprise but quickly regained control. "Yeah, could you take care of my Pokémon for me please?" said Ash with a grin, putting Pikachu, Rose and his Pokeballs onto a tray. Nurse Joy smiled and said, "Of course I can, Ash, it will be a pleasure." Ash started in confusion. "I don't remember telling you my name," said Ash in bewilderment, and Nurse Joy giggled. "No you didn't, but my younger sister, the Nurse Joy of Viridian City did. She said to give you our best care." Then she looked at Rose. She also happened to mention Rose's dislike of needles, she said with a giggle. Rose looked up at Nurse Joy in slight panic, which Nurse Joy noticed, and she was quick to say, "But of course, we won't be needing needles today, so don't worry." Ash chuckled seeing Rose's evident relief before looking up at Nurse Joy and asking, "By the way, did an orange-haired girl about my age come here just now?" Nurse Joy blinked and replied, "Yes, just 10 minutes ago. She came in looking most desperate and demanded a room with a shower. Not that I blame the poor dear, she looked absolutely awful." Ash just chuckled and said, "She's with me. We just came out of the Viridian forest and it seems she has a chronic fear of bug types which kept her up at night." "Oh dear," uttered Nurse Joy in concern. "Well, I hope she'll be okay." Ash grinned. "She should be. She's tough if she can go nearly 5 nights without sleep and then run the rest of the way here." When she first saw the city, "So how long will my Pokémon be?" he asked, and Nurse Joy blinked from the abrupt topic change but quickly recovered. "They should just be a few hours and they will be as good as new," she replied. Ash looked at the clock and seeing that the time was 5 p.m. decided that it was too late to think about going to the gym. "All right then, thanks Nurse Joy, please look after them," said Ash before looking down at Rose and Pikachu and saying, "Same as before guys, please behave for Nurse Joy and Pikachu, you know what to do." Pikachu and Rose nodded before being taken away to the examination room. Nothing much happened that night, except for Misty dragging out Ash, Pikachu and a disguised Rose out to a restaurant for dinner and of course making Ash pay. After the camp fare they had been enjoying in Viridian Forest, the restaurant was a blessed treat where they got to eat properly prepared meals, and even Pikachu and Rose much to their delight found bottles of ketchup and mayonnaise. Though when Ash saw them skiing on the bottles he made sure not to let them have too much, reminding them of the match tomorrow and he didn't want them to get sick. Then after dinner they returned to the Pokémon where they turned in. Misty finally got a full night's sleep, and when they got up the next morning she was in a really good mood. They now stood in front of the Pewter City gym. It was a rather imposing sort of place, made up of huge boulders stacked atop of each other, then held together in a frame of gigantic steel girders shaped like a house. Up in the top left corner of the biggest boulder the words Pewter GYM was carved into the boulder in big bold letters. Ash held back a shiver and thought to himself that the gym was really good at advertising that it was a gym for rock types. Ash looked at Pikachu and Rose who both nodded confidently and he smiled gratefully before straightening his back and going inside, Misty following him in without saying a word. The inside of the gym was a dark, and very wide open space. Ash suppressed another round of shivers and reached up a hand to slide Rose beside him. It was his first gym match after all and he couldn't help but feel nervous. Rose had shifted into normal form when they got inside and when Ash stroked her she nuzzled his cheek reassuringly feeling her father's nervousness. Ash felt Rose's nuzzle, her short but soft fur rubbing against his cheek felt rather comforting and he smiled gratefully at her. "Who goes there?" a voice suddenly boomed out. Ash jumped at the sudden shout and Misty let out a little yelp. Ash was blinded when a spotlight suddenly shone out onto a platform. When his eyes cleared he beheld an older teenager, of about 15 years of age, with brown skin and chocolate brown hair. He was wearing brown trousers, a burnt orange short-sleeved shirt with a green vest which had 4 large pockets. His most noticeable feature however was that his eyes looked like they were closed, showing just a thin line where his eyes would be. Ash gritted his teeth and shouted out confidently, "My name is Ash Ketchum from Pallet Town, I am here to challenge the Pewter City Gym for a league badge." The teenager nodded and stood up from the platform he was sitting on. "I accept your challenge, allow me to introduce myself, I am Brock the Pewter City Gym leader. The rules of the match are as follows, it is a 2-on-2 Pokémon battle, only the trainer may substitute, understood?" Brock then looked at Misty. "If you're just here to watch you can go up to the viewing platform which is up those stairs to the right," jerking his head to the wall where Misty saw a set of steps leading to a suspended platform above the battle. She looked at Ash and said, "Good luck Ash," before walking over the platform. Ash nodded in acknowledgement and watched as Brock jumped down into the trainer's box on floor which Ash recognized as where the trainer stands on a battlefield. Ash looked around and saw another box just near him and he went to stand in his spot. Ash watched as the stadium lights came on and he suddenly heard the sound of machinery and looked to see a battlefield sliding out of the wall. Ash was suddenly grateful that he hadn't been standing in the middle. He looked at the battlefield and saw that it was a rock-themed battleground. The entire platform was covered in large slabs of stone and there was a series of rocks and boulders spread out around, which could potentially provide cover. Brock suddenly shouted, "I'll start us off, go Geodude," and threw out a Pokeball which snapped open to reveal what looked like a round boulder with muscular arms and a face. The face had some rather prominent eyebrows. Ash brought out his Pokédex which instantly beeped and said, "Geodude, the rock Pokémon." Geodude has incredibly high defensive power, making it virtually resistant to any physical attacks. Ash took in the information before nodding at Pikachu who instantly jumped in the field and shouted his excitement. This is what he has been training for and he was finally getting a chance to show his strength. Brock took one look at Pikachu and laughed, "You seriously don't expect to win with a Pikachu do you? Such a small electric type couldn't possibly win." He laughed incredulously and Ash clenched his fist tightly before shouting back, "Don't you dare underestimate us. We have been training for this all week and so I'm going to teach you that size and type do not matter." Brock scoffed but said, "I'll believe it when I see it. Alright Geodude, let's start off with tackle." Geodude shouted out his name like all Pokémon do and charged at Pikachu intending to hit him with his greater weight. Ash grinned, "Dodge it and let's test its defenses with a Thunder Shock," he commanded and Pikachu smirked and dodged the much slower Pokémon, jumping away before spinning around to instantly launch a Thunder Shock with a cry. The Thunder Shock arced over to hit Geodude in the back, but it didn't seem to feel the attack at all, instead just swiveling around on the spot to face his opponent. Brock smirked in satisfaction and shouted, "Geodude, let's retaliate with rock throw, squash that little mouse." Geodude instantly began picking up boulders and throwing them at Pikachu. Ash just smirked and yelled, "Use agility to dodge and then use that speed to power up Iron Tail." Pikachu began to run extremely fast and Geodude's eyes began to vanish from one spot to another. As soon as Geodude threw a rock at the yellow streak that was Pikachu, the streak would vanish and reappear closer than before. Pikachu made sure to dodge every boulder that Geodude threw, knowing that even one hit could hurt him enough to knock him out of the battle. As soon as Pikachu was close enough, Pikachu's tail began to glow white. Pikachu began to count down in his mind to time the attack, and when he reached 1, Pikachu jumped up and spun in mid-air to bring his now steel-like tail crashing down on Geodude's head. Brock saw what was going to happen and quickly shouted, "Counter with Mega Punch," and Geodude yelled defiantly, quickly striking forward with its fist to slam it into Pikachu's powerful iron tail. Neither Pokémon was able to break the other's attack and it quickly became a contest of power. Brock grinned and shouted, "That's it, Geodude. Push it through," and Ash quickly encouraged Pikachu to do the same. Pikachu and Geodude continued to push against each other's attack and sparks created by the clash showered the ground, but Ash could see that Pikachu was going to lose out due to Geodude's greater experience and weight. Ash gritted his teeth before an idea came to him and he instantly shouted out, "Pikachu! Channel a thunderbolt through your tail and then hit Geodude with Brick Break." Pikachu yelled and channeled an enormous amount of electric power through his tail. Geodude flinched from the far stronger electric attack and Pikachu took the chance and spun around into Geodude's reach and hit it in the face with a Brick Break. The fighting-type attack smashed Geodude into the ground, and while the attack was strong, it wasn't strong enough to knock it out, but Geodude did become very dizzy. Ash saw his chance and yelled, "Finish it up with Iron Tail, let's win this." Pikachu instantly charged at a stunned Geodude and once more charged up an Iron Tail attack. This time the hardened tail smashed into Geodude's forehead, blowing it backwards, where smashed into the wall behind Brock and slumped to the ground unconscious. Ash cried out, "Victory! That was fantastic, Pikachu," and held out his arms to catch a jubilant Pikachu who was flushed from his victory over Geodude. Rose was also bouncing around cheering for Pikachu and generally having a good time. Brock, getting over his surprise, ran over to check on his Geodude and quickly found that other than being unconscious, Geodude was just fine and so returned Geodude to his Pokeball. Misty, who had been standing up on the scaffolding suspended high above the battlefield, muttered, "Nice going, Pikachu," when she suddenly heard a cry from beside her and looked to see 9 children watching the battle, ranging from 9 years old to 3 years. Misty was startled to see they all looked nearly the same as Brock and surmised they must be his siblings. Brock watched the celebrating trio for a few seconds before shouting out, "That was well fought, Ash Ketchum, but this isn't over yet," interrupting Ash's good mood. Ash took a few breaths to calm down before resuming his place in the trainer's box. Ash gazed out at Brock resolutely and shouted, "You're right, let's finish this, Brock. I will not lose." Brock gazed into Ash's eyes and saw nothing but calm resolve. Brock smirked, "We'll see about that, Ash, because I doubt you have anything that can defeat my Onix," and with that he tossed out a Pokeball which opened with an enormous flash to reveal the biggest Pokemon Ash had ever seen. It resembled a great chain of boulders stuck together to make a snake-like form. Its head was also boulder-shaped with a great rocky spine sticking out the top. When Onix was fully materialized, it let out a bellowing roar which echoed all through the gym, and Ash winced in pain as the sound caused his ears to start ringing. Ash looked at Onix in concern before turning to look at Rose, who was slated to battle next. Rose noticed Ash's concern and looked into his eyes, seeing his worry for her safety. Rose took another look at the gigantic Pokémon before turning back to Ash and nodded bravely. Ash smiled at her brave face and said, "Why is it you get all the tough ones? We really have to work on that, don't we?" He trailed off, seeing Rose's determination, and sighed, "If you're really that sure, then let's do it." Rose immediately flew into the field without a command and faced off against the large rock type which dominated the scene. Brock frowned seeing the tiny pink Pokémon that Ash had sent out, He would have normally said something, but after Ash's Pikachu had effortlessly defeated his Geodude without taking any damage, he was reluctant to immediately judge. He had never seen any Pokémon like it, so who knew what capabilities it had? The fact that it was floating at the very least told him that it must be a psychic type. Ash swiveled his hat around, seemingly to psych himself up, and shouted, "We'll start off this time. Rose, use Bubble Beam." Rose immediately leaped up high before clasping her paws in front of her. A blue light formed between her paws, and with a cry an intense beam of glowing bubbles blew out from her paws, flying towards Onix. Brock immediately reacted, shouting, "Quickly Onix, use Sandstorm," and Onix roared loudly as a sandy whirlwind blew into existence around the rock type. Ash watched with a groan as the fast-moving sand popped the bubbles, and after the bubble beam finished, Onix was left completely unharmed. Brock crowed triumphantly, "We've fought water types before, you didn't think we wouldn't have a defense, did you, Ash?" Ash managed to keep his calm, though it had shocked him when Rose's attack had been so easily thwarted. All it meant was that he had to go about it a different way, and that meant that Rose would have to get in close. Ash clenched his fist and shouted, "Charge in while using Water Gun, then when close enough use an Iron Tail to the head." Rose immediately shot forward with cry, all the while forming a glowing watery orb between her paws, from which a seemingly inexhaustible torrent of water shot forward at Onix like water from a fire hose. "Evade and use Tackle Onix," Brock commanded, and Onix bent sideways to evade the raging torrent before advancing forward to ram his head into Rose. Ash saw the charging Onix swerving around the water gun with the intent of hitting Rose and desperately shouted, "Counter with Brick Break." Within seconds Rose cut off the water gun and swung a glowing arm at the Onix, just in time to intercept a powerful tackle attack from the much larger Onix. Rose was able to prevent damage, but there was no denying physics, and when Onix's far greater mass hit Rose's Brick Break, the energy release blew Rose backwards and she was barely to prevent herself from hitting the wall. Ash growled that Onix was quite fast despite its size, and so far despite Rose's water-type attacks they had been unable to break this stalemate. Brock has trained his Onix well. Before Ash could think of anything though, Brock yelled out, "Screech Attack," and Onix took a deep breath before letting out the most horrible sound that Ash had ever heard, a piercing screech that penetrated his brain. It was even worse for Rose as she clasped her paws over her sore ears and clenched her eyes shut. Then all of a sudden the sound stopped, and with a speed that belied its size Onix swept around Rose and captured her within its coils, and Ash instantly recognized it as a bind attack. "Rose!" Ash shouted in a panic before looking up at Brock with anger in his eyes, but Brock only smirked before saying, "Let's see you get out of this one, Ash. Keep it up, Onix." Onix continued to squeeze Rose painfully and Ash raced to think of plan. Meanwhile Pikachu, who was standing beside Ash, watched anxiously, sparks of lighting appearing from his cheeks in his anger. Pikachu so wished he could interfere but knew he couldn't or they would be forfeit. Misty, who was still up in the stands, also watched nervously. She had become rather fond of Rose, such an irrepressible bundle of fun, joy, and affection, and it was unbearable to see her in pain. "Come on Rose, you can do it," she whispered. Ash's eyes looked around wildly, taking in everything that could possibly help, but nothing sprung to mind. The only attack that could be effective now would be a water gun, but Rose was in such an awkward position that she couldn't possibly twist around enough to aim at Onix. If only it could be spread across a wider area. Ash suddenly looked up and shouted, "That's it." Brock looked up in curiosity, wondering Ash could have possibly come up with. Ash grinned and shouted, "Rose, water gun straight up, bounce it off the roof." Rose let out a squeal of pain but managed to once more shoot a water gun, this time straight up. Everybody watched as the water gun impacted against the roof and shattered into a million droplets which began raining down in a heavy spray of rain, completely soaking Onix. The rock type roared in pain, and with its concentration broken, Rose felt its coils loosen around her and she finally wiggled free from her rocky prison. Ash and Pikachu cheered when they saw Rose break free and float high above the battlefield, but Ash quickly commanded, "Rose, before it recovers use Bubble Beam and then finish it with Iron Tail." Rose heard the command, and although she was still smarting from bruises from all over her body, she once again charged up another Bubble Beam and shot it at the stunned Onix. This time there was no flying sand to pop the bubbles, and the Bubble Beam impacted all over Onix's body, causing it to roar out in pain and anger, and it tried to move to dodge the next attack. But it was too late. By the time Onyx got over the bubble beam, Rose had already streaked over with a glowing, steel hardtail and smashed it into Onyx's head, and Onyx let out a roar before collapsing to the ground unconscious. Everybody looked on in shock at the sudden defeat of Onyx before moving their attention to Rose. Rose was still hovering just above Onyx's head and panting heavily. She hung limply, exhaustion evident in her posture. "Rose, are you okay?" Ash called out in concern, and he watched as Rose slowly turned around to look at him. When she had fully turned around to face Ash, she smiled a happy but exhausted smile and gave him a victory sign. Seeing her smile, Ash finally allowed himself to express his feelings and let out a great big cheer while Pikachu cheered with him. Up on the viewing platform, Misty was clapping happily and also feeling relieved that Rose hadn't been hurt too much. Brock watched with a little smile as Ash congratulated an exhausted Rose, who was now happily sitting in Ash's arms as he checked her over for any serious injuries, which other than a couple bruises and exhaustion she was just fine. "Rose, you were fantastic." Ash continued to lavish praise, all the while stroking a limp Rose pleasurably along her back, and Ash then turned to Pikachu. "You were amazing as well, Pikachu. That Geodude didn't stand a chance." Ash applauded Pikachu and Pikachu grinned happily with a victory sign. Ash was suddenly distracted when Brock returned Onyx before walking up to Ash and standing in front of him. Brock looked rather seriously at Ash, Pikachu, and the unknown pink Pokémon which Ash had apparently called Rose, rather appropriate actually, considering its color. These three were going to go far. Brock suddenly got a big smile on his face, and his demeanor was suddenly a lot different, and he laughed out loud. "That was the best battle I've had in a long time, Ash. It's not very often that we get a double KO without any losses and type disadvantages to boot, especially in a gym match, and so I am proud to present you with the Boulder Badge. You've earned it." With that, Brock held out a rather simple-looking badge which was just a gray octagon-shaped badge. Ash took the badge and brought it close to inspect it. Pikachu jumped up on Ash's shoulder to get a closer look, and Rose also twisted around in Ash's arm to look curiously. Ash smiled. "My first badge, and it's thanks to you guys," he said, looking at Pikachu and Rose, who smiled happily. Ash then clenched his fist and smirked. "But that is only the beginning, we still have 7 more to go, and then the League Championships," Ash declared before looking again at Pikachu and Rose. "Are you with me?" he asked, and Pikachu and Rose looked at each other before getting matching smirks and nodding yes happily.